you better.
And we're live, folks, to talk about SE. And in the spirit of SE, we're going to improvise. And I asked Jeff to, in fact, that might be actually part of it. So, because it'll be sort of like part of the Artisan temperament, a sort of a discussion, a starting point, is that I asked you to think of certain things, certain bullet points as you watch the video. So Jeff is going to be replying to the empirical instincting video, the video on SE that I did with Haley and Jonathan. And I asked him to maybe come up with some bullet points and sort of like, so I asked him to sort of plan what he was going to say. And what is your instinctive response to that?
I don't plan what I'm going to say. And I didn't. I mean, I sort of did. Like, okay, the closest I come is I start thinking about us doing this. And the thing, I know you well enough to know the things you usually ask or sort of talk about. So then I sort of envision things I might say to things you might say that might happen. But it never turns out like that anyway, exactly. And like a lot of times I don't even do that. But, this time I probably did a little bit. But the first thing I have to say, while you're eating, so, you can enjoy your bite, is that I have seen you try to wrap up a video quickly before where you kind of speed up a little bit. But that was the first time I've ever seen you go like, I don't know, maybe 30 minutes straight of like just speeding up everything. It was pretty amazing to watch. You just go through these slides and you're like hitting some of them like 5 seconds. You're like, and that says a thing about da, 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 da. And then and the hilarious thing to me was that the time you started saying, oh, we've got 20 minutes left or 15 minutes left, I could see on the video time that there was way more than that still on there. So I'm like, you still didn't stick to that. even with your hyperspeed mode, you still took longer. But that was funny. That was very entertaining, I have to say. No, I didn't follow most of what you were saying during that part, but just watching you do that was funny. So, other things I immediately remember. One I already told you because you were showing the Pimbleton quote that I typed out, and Jonathan was saying, "Oh, I haven't really seen much of him, but what I did see, he seemed like an ICJ." And so I don't know if he saw like a 5 minute or 1 minute clip of him doing paperwork at his desk or something, and that was. But if he saw any actual interactions with Pimbleton, I find it hard to believe anyone would think he was an ICJ. But anyway, the link that I gave you was, I think, pretty sure the scene that I introduced you to Pimbleton with, because it was the one I posted in the ESFP Facebook group when somebody was like, what would an ESFP look like as a police detective? Like somebody specifically asked that, and I'm like, this. Because there's so many great things about that scene. There's obviously a lot of going on that leads up to it that you don't see if you just watch that scene out of context. But you don't even have to know the context to get some of it. You can obviously tell that in the premise of the scene, he gets a guy to confess to a murder that he didn't commit. So obviously there's different ways you can do that. And there are a lot of police detective portrayals will show exactly what Pimbleton starts talking about. Not necessarily the racial element, but cop intimidating somebody into confessing. But if you watch this scene, you see that Pimbleton does not intimidate him into confessing. Like, he does not confess because he's afraid of Pimbleton. So he does this 2-prong thing where one is, it's all a performance. And it's really a performance for his boss, G, more than it is for the suspect. But it still achieves the goal that he's trying to do, to show his boss and do his job technically at the same time. But he appeals to him on an emotional level, and he does it by like relating to the racial aspect and his pride and saying, like, as Black people, we know how our community has been mistreated. And it's funny because he talks about when he was first a cop, and he may have even just completely made that up when he talked, because I don't remember, sometimes I forget like what things were that they were kept from the book and what things were changed, but I'm pretty sure the character, like the cop in the book that he's based on, that he came from New York and that he started as a cop in New York. I don't think he started in Baltimore. So I think that part that he talked about where he started his beat over on whatever street, like he just made that up. And there's an example again of an Artisan thing where it doesn't matter what the truth is. If there's an example of something that you can go to appeal to this guy, then that's what he's going to do. So it's like he tries to relate to him on I'm in the black community like you are, so I relate to how cops always treated us. And so I became a cop, and I wanted to represent our community. But if you look at, previous episodes, he's established that that's not why he became a cop. So again, he's making this up because he knows that this guy's going to fall for it, basically.
But that is also important to him, though, because remember when he was with the character played by James Earl Jones, he talked about him doing good stuff for the community.
Right. Yeah, I'm not saying he doesn't care at all about that, but the way that he uses it here is he plays up that element because he thinks, okay, how do I get this guy who I really don't have much in common with to relate to me and feel like I'm on his side and I'm one of him? And so he goes straight to that. And he does it very dramatically. He's slamming the chair on the desk and being like, you made me a bitch in front of my partner. He very much like makes it from the start. He takes charge of it and does this performance. And then he turns to making the dude feel guilty about his friend dying. And he uses that emotional connection to drive him to that. And all the while, he believes that he didn't do it. He thinks his boss is trying to pressure him into getting somebody from the neighborhood to confess because he doesn't want Pimbleton to pursue it being a police shooting, which, of course, is what it turns out to be. But but so he's doing this two-pronged performance, and there's so much in that, including at the very end when he says he would have stood a better chance in the back of a paddy wagon. So he's playing up like he's basically saying, see what I just did? That's how good I am at that. That if he had been with the intimidating confessing cops, he would have had a better chance than what I just did, because he had no chance with me. Like I just played him from the start completely and he fell for all of it. So if you want to talk about an ESFP who is an intelligent, experienced person who can use emotional connections to extract the needed result and still make it out as see what my great performance that I just showed you.
Yeah, and
he does all of that in that one scene.
Yeah, and I would also say to Jonathan, like, even if we're talking in terms of functions, ISTJs are not that good in terms of their people skills to be able to do what he was able to do in that scene in terms of manipulation and be able to control his affect to act, basically. And there was something that struck me is that they can use things, ESFPs and artisans in general can use things that they believe in tactically. And other people might think, how can you say that? Does that mean that you don't care about that? So I can give an example. So Del Boy, the character of Del Boy in Only Fools and Horses, I think is ESFP. He really loved his dead mother. But he would use that as leverage over his younger brother and say, your mother on her deathbed said. So he would still exploit it. So he absolutely believed in that, absolutely loved his mother, but he would still exploit it. Yeah. And so there's a parallel there with Pembleton where he has these strong feelings about racism and that lot, but he can still exploit that and play that card in that scene or things like that. It doesn't mean he doesn't believe in it. It just means he's artisan. He can still use it tactically.
Artisans are opportunists, and that never completely shuts off. Like even when you're in the midst of like you're having very strong emotions about something or very passionate about something, you can't shut off that opportunistic way of looking at things. And so if you see an immediate angle to play or an immediate advantage, then you're going to take advantage of it. And that's the thing. And goes back to the difference. And we started this talking about improvising and spontaneity. When Pimbleton walked in that room, walked into the box in that scene, did he have a bunch of stuff written down about what he was going to say, or a plan? Like, he may have had sort of a general idea of, here's where this guy comes from, so here's what I'm probably going to appeal to. But he didn't know exactly what the guy was going to say. And so Bayless asking him about like whether they were friends, and him denying that. And then when, he denied it when Pimbleton asked him, and then Bayless gets him to sort of say that, he immediately sees that angle of, oh, you told the truth to the white detective, but not to me. So he's like, he may not even have known when he said that exactly where he was going with that, but he decided that immediately that was a thing to jump on, to get the guy off guard about that dynamic. So that's the thing, is there is always looking for that immediate thing to get an advantage from. So the opportunistic thing I'm talking about.
Right. I think, so I'm just going to say to Jonathan, it will be at the start of the video, nearly. Well, within first 5 minutes. Right. So I was thinking now about
he's welcome to join us too, as far as I'm concerned. But
well, he'll be able to say in future, like, what he's in a pickle at the moment.
He's a what moment?
He's in a pickle at the moment, so he's not able to join.
Okay. Right. Well, that's fine. I just wanted to say that just in case he thought that I was necessarily needing to monopolize the video or something.
And here's something about that, sort of like, for people who like functions. Right. Okay. So now I know who a certain person is, but I don't want to say the person is, because I might out that person who's just posted as Lotus Podcast. But I know who that person is, and give me a thumbs up if you are the person I think you are, Lotus Podcast.
Well, that was some convoluted stuff.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to out the person.
Not surprising coming from you, though, Ben.
Right.
There was the other thing I was laughing at was the once again your label there with the, and I'm thinking,
well, there we go. Thing where, right, there we go.
Hi, Shalina, long time no talk.
Right.
Yeah, because I'm like, okay, somebody who just happens across this and sees the name I've got in parentheses might be like, what's that mean? So they might not immediately know, but looking at what you've got, like, it's just this complete abstract code. If you don't know what that is, then it's just it. Again, it reminds me, I said this before, of the old thing in my early days of being on the internet, when there was this thing that had been passed around called the geek code, where people would put it in their signatures on, like message board messages and things, and it would be this long string of letters and numbers and symbols, but it actually had a meaning because it all referenced certain, like, sort of geeky interests and like what your category in each one of those things was. So that's what it reminds me of when I see those long string title names.
And I don't mind using Pembleton as the sort of theme of this in talking about the event, because it's something that people can go and look at, and sure. That character was because there's certain issues there of where you said that theme of opportunism is never switched off in the Artisan, even when they're principled. And so I would say in Pembleton, you can almost have a dimension, a contradiction, if you will, between some things that he's very principled on, but he's also got this opportunistic attitude. And so I could imagine that an INFP, looking at it from the outside, I imagine that INFP would be much more consistent in their principles and have sort of abstractified their principles into a system to stick to. and that system becomes part of their identity. Whereas for Pemberton, I remember going through lots of clips. No, not through going, not just in reviewing the stories with you. There would be certain things I brought up, and we discussed them in many an episode of Pemberton using something that was a belief, where it was in the moment he acted like he didn't care, or he used it tactically, and you contrasted that to Lewis, where it was much more firmly held to him.
Yeah, Lewis had kind of those line in the sand statements he would make, like, you go when it's your time to go and anything else is homicide. He would sort of make those pronouncements that were very like introverted feeling, if you want to use the function term, like where it was just like, this is always the case because it's how I feel it is. Now Bayless would do that too, I think, from the extroverted feeling point of view, but his was much more about, this is how society is, or this is how people should be. Whereas it came much more personally to Lewis. It was like every situation had more personal impact. It wasn't about like, this is a reflection of society or whatever. So that's why I think Homicide's such a good show for exploring those personalities, because you see so many well-written characters that display those things. And the ones we had a tougher time typing when we did the reviews are the ones where they're not written as consistently, because there were a few, especially later on, where that was the case, where it seemed like they kind of were a mishmash of things because it was more about, we need somebody in the plot to fill this role, than it was, let's keep the character consistent.
Yeah, like the character Stivers, who like early on was very sort of like quite assertive and standing up, and then it's where characters which become, there's a posh word for it, a cipher, where they just become, it's the bad writing in the sense of what happened with Game of Thrones. I suggest you don't watch Game of Thrones, Jeff, because
oh, I'm not.
It's the final 4 to 3 seasons get progressively worse in terms of characters. I've never known a show where the strength of the show becomes its weakness. Where in that, what I mean by that is, like, the first 4 seasons, the characterization was really good, and the plots were sort of driven by the characters. But then what happened in the later series, when they ran out of the source material, is they started to maneuver the characters into situations and do stupid things that the characters wouldn't do. Characters that used to be really smart did dumb things. So, as an example, when it was well written, they had one character in order to find out who the leaker was, he told 4 different suspects 4 different stories, and then depending on which story got leaked, he would know who the leaker was. And then we have characters who become stupid and do things for the sake of the plot. And so putting that sacrificing the character integrity for the sake of the plot, that's a sign of bad writing. They must not, especially in television. In television, you must not compromise the integrity of the characters, because that is a big reason why people watch a television series. They watch it for the characters. You can survive a bad episode with a stupid plot. You can't survive ruining the integrity of a character.
Yeah, and that's why even a show as good as Homicide, there were still a few characters that weren't written as consistently towards a later time, and because they had done such a good job with the earlier ones, it was much easier to see the contrast.
Yeah, I mean, for people like you, like you watched Homicide probably because you really related to the characters. I mean, you enjoyed the show, but for those people that really relate to a character, it's like with George Costanza. Like, the actor Jason Alexander said that when Larry David wrote it, that's when George was written at his best. And when Larry David left, because George was based on Larry David, that's when George started to do more stupid things. And so
Yeah, it just sort of
less.
became more of a caricature instead of
Yeah.
having the more honest reactions.
Yeah. Anyway, but getting back to Pemberton, I think he shows in the difference between, and we always contrast. I like to contrast as a theme, Lewis versus Pemberton, because they're sort of inverted in terms of the stereotypes. Where the stereotype is that the ESFP is more gregarious, and the ISFP is more of a loner. But in Homicide: Life on the Street, it was Lewis who knew more people. Pemberton just stuck mainly to his wife. And also, we had a sense with Pemberton that he moved in the sort of higher social circle of the sort of the elite black society in Baltimore. We got little hints of that because he knew the James Earl Jones. I was always said Edward James Olmos, the James Earl Jones character, and so you got that sense that, you know what I mean, that Pemberton moved in those circles of the accomplished black society in Baltimore, whereas Lewis, he came more from the hood, and he was able to. He was more like the people that he would encounter as part of his job. So it was easier for him to communicate with most of the black people that he would encounter as part of his job. And he wouldn't, for example, encounter the sort of the high society black people as much as, say, Pemberton. So I think there were certain class things there with Lewis and Pemberton that affected the amount that they would socialize.
Yeah, and the stereotype, as you say, is, I mean, that's what it is. It's a stereotype, and the introvert extrovert thing, like it, as I did a video called "Extrovert Does Not Mean Social Wizard."
Yeah.
And if you don't mind hearing me break down crying, then it's a pretty good video to listen to. In terms of some of the things that I say in it, because the point I'm making is that social awkwardness and introversion are not the same thing. For a long time, I used to conflate them, and a lot of people do. And what you see in the characters of Pemberton and Lewis is more comfortable in social situations than Pemberton is. And it's not because he's an extrovert, because what's going on the inside is that whatever, theoretically, Lewis in all those scenarios, even if he's enjoying himself by some token, he's being like sort of drained by the experience, where after it's over, he's still going to need to sort of have his alone time to ponder, introspect, or whatever you want to call it. Like, so he can enjoy the experience, especially if it gives him an opportunity to, whatever he's interested in, to talk about it or to be in that sort of element that he enjoys. But even in that sense, most of the people that Lewis attracts to him, it's because he sort of has that stylish, cool demeanor. Like, he sort of plays up the image of, I'm kind of the slick guy, so there's people that are attracted to that. And so people gravitate towards him. It's not because he's an extrovert. It's because he sort of he portrays himself in that way. But Pemberton even expresses at one point to Bayless that he wishes he had more friends. He's not good at maintaining friendships, which is something I relate to very much. And I think I've heard a lot of other extroverts have, like that. There's a lot of other elements that affect, how many people you actually have that are friends. And often the complaint from extroverts is, do we have a lot of acquaintances, but not a lot of true friends? Because the way that we behave sort of allows for sort of temporary attachments from people, because there's a particular activity that we share together, or there's particular things about us that attract people to us, in the sense of, oh, that's a fun person to hang out with, to do this thing, or to go to this place. But then it's like, when that's over, well, then I want to be with the people that are more like my friends and family, and not with that guy, So there's that detachment where people can look at someone and go, oh, that person knows a lot of people, so that means they've got a bunch of friends. But it's not necessarily the same thing.
it's also about how much there is in common. So, for example, say an INTJ or an INTP. Well, if 20% of people were INTJs and INTPs, there'd be more people in common for them to communicate with, especially when they're younger. It's going to be easier for them when they get older and move into a kind of job where there'll be other INTJs and INTPs probably around them. So in that sense, it can be easier for ISTJs to find people who are like them than say INTPs and INTJs, because there are a lot of ISTJs. But yeah, I just wrote that about Pemberton might have a 4 in his trifix, his tri-type, because what was that about Felton that said about Pemberton in the pilot about he thinks he's better than us because he listens to
Emmylou Harris?
Yeah, something like that.
And that was part of what you were talking about before in terms of sort of the circles that Pemberton was from or whatever. But if you notice, in the whole 6 seasons that Pemberton was on there, not once did he ever say he was better than anyone. And that's another reason that I'm that alone doesn't say what type someone is, but it's to me even more evidence in my view of him as an ESFP, because again, we don't view people that way, or ourselves as better at certain skills. Yes, like there are things like if you had said, Pemberton would say he's the best in the box, and which is why when the quote that you read was him lamenting that at that point he was not, because of the stroke, he had lost some of that skill, and so he was basically saying like the thing that used to be my fuel on this job is not there anymore. And I was just talking with Morgan the other day about Michael Jordan, about how when he came back the second time after his second retirement, he came back a third time, and when he was part owner of the Wizards, and he said that it was too frustrating. Like when he quit the final time, he looked around at the other players and they didn't have the same desire to win that he did, not as much as he did. But physically, he was no longer able to carry the team the way he did in the old days. So his response used to be, well, they don't have to care as much as I do because I'm going to physically, impose my will and make us win. And he could no longer do that, so he couldn't do it anymore.
Did he literally come out and say that? Did he literally come out and say, I had to carry the team?
Pretty much, yeah.
I think that's an example. In function terms, that's like pretty low FE.
Yeah, well, I mean, he called his teammates my supporting cast, so that tells you right there, wow. And he's an ISFP, but obviously the instinct is the same in terms of you have the skills that you're best at, and the position is I'm saying the reality of here's what I'm better than anybody at. It's just factual. I'm better at doing this. It's not an arrogance like I'm a better person than someone because of that. Like, I don't even remember hearing Jordan say that at any point. I don't think he described himself as a better person than anyone, because I don't think he believed that. And that's the difference, is I don't think, I'm not saying I know what every SP in the world would say about that, but I can't recall, except in an actual performance where somebody was just being another character, an SP type person claiming that they were somehow like morally superior to other people or better as people than someone, because it's just not the way that we look at people.
Yeah, I mean, a guardian or an idealist would be much more likely to say that. Sort of the
yeah, because they'll group people in terms of like good people and bad people, and whereas I think artisans are much more likely to look at it in terms of there are good and bad actions, but people are people. We're all basically flawed, and that's directly out of one of the Kersey books. People are flawed, and you can't, you buy too much into someone's whatever, like someone's goodness or someone's brilliance or whatever, like you're going to be let down. So it's like everybody is a flawed human being. if you judge someone, it's judging the actions that they take rather than them as a person being, and that's why, again, I think we're probably the people that react the least when there's like scandals of like politicians or other people, like, they get busted in a crack house or with prostitutes or whatever, and people make a big, and there's so many people that act shocked by stuff like that. And I'm like, I don't understand. I didn't understand that when I was 20, but I especially don't now. I'm like, how can you like observe things and be shocked by any of this?
Hey, Jeff, I've got a question for you about a likely candidate for an artisan.
Okay.
I think Hunter Biden might be an artisan.
Yeah, that would be a reasonable assumption.
Right then. Yeah. Here we go. Question from Shalina.
Now you have to put that in the hashtag or whatever, the description, so that people you'll get a certain number of extra views just from mentioning Hunter Biden.
Yeah, well, I just
what's his face? The carnivore diet guy. I always forget his name because it's not memorable enough. No offense, but he's actually a doctor, but he did videos all about the carnivore diet, and then I noticed that he had he'd gotten way more political in his videos, which YouTube in some instances has like suppressed that, but obviously he was willing to risk that because his views and subscribers went way up. Because he was still talking about the carnivore diet stuff, but he was relating it to like overall health things and like all the virus mitigation policies and all that kind of stuff. And then, but he would just, in the course of that, he would just flat out do videos that were just like Biden's a bozo, or, things like that, where he obviously had figured out from looking at, his analytics or whatever, that certain things were more popular. And so he kind of shifted into doing more.
Oh, yeah. I've seen that with sort of certain, because I watch military channels and like they're pushing a sort of false narrative. But so this question from Shalina, we could sort of use this as an example of how Jeff and I sort of look at things a little bit differently from most people in MBTI. Is that if I get a question like this, I would sort of think, well, I don't sort of think about it like this. I would go to temperament and I would think, so for example, you could get guardians that were not FI and TE. So you could get, say, SFJs who could also think about moral superiority because that's what they've been taught. They might, for example, that might be their FE. That would be their values. Their values from society would be. So, for example, say in the 1950s, where you have an SFJ and they're taught about American values versus the values of the Soviet Union. And so they're going to feel, and so I think that you would get a lot of, say, SFJs, you get a lot of types, a lot of feeling types without FI and TE who could be equally sort of morally superior because those are the conventional ethics. And so I wouldn't put it down to just functions like that. I think temperament matters because you can have a morality that comes from FE or a morality that comes from FI, just depending on whether it's conventional or it comes from the individual, sort of more subjective, kind of deeply held feelings going against other people. So that was just an answer to that.
I don't even like, and Jonathan may or may not remember this, but a long time ago, we were in a Facebook group together, and he either was a part of the moderation of or just witnessed, I don't remember, an exchange where I was expressing how I didn't like sort of drive-by mental health diagnoses, like calling people unhealthy or of whatever type. And I got into kind of a back and forth with somebody where ultimately, I got more upset that my messages were deleted than that anybody disagreed with me. But anyway, I don't even like that for like a type as a whole. So if you're trying to like isolate a function and say like unhealthy FI, like what is that? I don't even know what that means. Like, because to me, FI is shorthand for introverted feeling, and it's basically like the basic values that someone has. So it's like the essence of someone in terms of their judgments. So I don't know how that in itself can be unhealthy. Now you could say the result of expression of that could be unhealthy, or someone who in some way is mentally unhealthy could lash out because of those things. Something in spontaneous feelings that were expressed in a way that hurt people's feelings. I suppose that could be an example of that, but I'm not sure whether that's what she's talking about or not. But.
Yeah, this is tricky. So what I would say is, so let me go through this, because you're sort of coming at this from different angles. So there's truth to what Jeff says, and there's truth to what Shalina says. It's one of these questions of like putting too much emphasis on one over the other. It's a combination of factors. Okay. Right, so unhealthy FI. Okay. So, yes, what I've noticed is that. So I think an example I can give of that, Jeff, is that someone with an unhealthy FI would be somebody they become very egocentric and concentrated on their own feelings, and there's some overlap with certain like Enneagram 4 kind of people, but that kind of unhealthy FI, it takes away one of the best strengths of FI, which is empathy. When the person becomes so egocentric, they're not able to empathize with other people. And so this is sort of and so you could have, it's like the good and the bad of FI. It's like FI is independent, so you could have like the way somebody is wired. Somebody could be so with someone who's got a high FI, it would be their FI could be wired good, their FI could be wired bad. With an more FE valuing person, it's more about what the values are around that person, their conventional values, as to whether those are good or bad. So, for example, you could have an SFJ that lives in a culture that treats women horribly, and the SFJ could have those values of treating women horribly because of the conventional values. Whereas in that same culture, you might have someone who's FI valuing, who would be against that treatment of women just because of the way they internally feel that, oh, that's not right. So there are certain situations where FI can be seen as better, or FE can be seen as better. There's sort of like unhealthiness on both sides. And I've sort of come to the conclusion that general unhealthiness can actually mess up all of your functions. It's like Jeff and I have talked about, say, artisans where that same part of SE that can make them really good in sport or really on their game in terms of show business can also take a sort of wrong turn and can end up in sort of hedonistic behavior, and where it's that same, I think it's search for stimulation, isn't it, Jeff? And where there can be like an unhealthy version of all of the functions, and it can ruin the thing that they were initially best at just for a general unhealthy.
I just don't think I would ever term it that way.
Yeah, no, and I'm having trouble. I'm having trouble trying to term it this way. So, Jeff, you try and
because it's like functions to me again are labels for preferences within. Well, I mean, they're usually for just cognitive preferences. I just thought even that's a little bit abstract, but it's sort of ways of labeling directions that the brain goes in certain circumstances or whatever. So I feel like health is a separate thing.
Yes. Yeah.
Because health is more about like, not to say that your brain can't be unhealthy. I guess it can, but it's sort of like a factor in it, like of your overall mental health. Like, but I don't think it's really, I would not describe it as a function being healthy or unhealthy. That's not the way that I view it. And I don't know, maybe if we had the seance and had Carl Jung back to ask him, maybe he would use those terms. But I don't remember reading him use that term. That doesn't mean he didn't, because I didn't read every word he ever wrote. But I did read Psychological Types, and I don't recall. He may have said an unhealthy, say introverted feeling type.
Yeah.
Said unhealthy introverted feeling as a function.
Yeah, he would give an example of when he would describe the type, and he then showed how the type became more and more unhealthy. So, for example, when he did the introverted thinking type, of course, when he was describing that type, he was purely describing INTP. He almost forgot about ISTP when he described that type. There's a heavy bias in all these systems created by NTPs. It's like they forget about STPs.
Yeah, well, and that's what I go to whenever people talk about Kersey relying on stereotypes too much. And I'm like, Jung did that even more so, probably, because he isolated it even more to focus on a particular thing.
Yeah, it's how INTPs use TI. That's how even Dario Nardi's definition of TI is slanted too much towards how I use it, rather than say how Jeff's son Morgan uses it. It's a different use, whereas I try to peg it as subject. But getting back to what I was saying about, so when he gave an example of FI, he said that the function can become corrupted by too much ego being involved. But I think it's a particular use of the function. So, for example, empathy. So he gave the example of empathy can be corrupted if the person becomes too egocentric, and that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But what I can say is I can give an examples of maybe it's the activities that we tag as the functions that we associate with the functions rather than. So, for example, there's a lot of examples of political leadership, and you look at the stupid actions that they take, and really it's a combination. It's not that they're stupid. A lot of them, it's that a combination of arrogance and ignorance, and a lot of it is arrogance and being corrupt leads to them taking actions that show bad judgment. Whereas you can have somebody with less intellect but have a better judgment, and it's these other things that can corrupt. So you can have someone who's very bright, and so you could say someone's TI or TE could be corrupted if they are corrupted and their judgment is bad.
Okay, so I was reading the responses from Lotus podcast, and so let me try to clarify.
Okay.
Are you saying like an ISFP or an SP in general like could become consumed enough with like their own internal feelings that they are like, why don't other people see these as important as I am, or see things the way that I feel them? And thus they're looking at it from a point of view of moral superiority. Is that maybe what you're asking? I'm trying to get to the crux of it based on what you're putting in the text. But because referring to inferior function acting more as an antagonistic thing to the Dom is I'm not sure exactly what that means, but anyway, I'm just trying to sort of guess as to how that would, because the stuff I was talking about. Well, I mean, to get it back to the homicide character, when you think about Lewis, he had sort of his own personal crusade in one season where everything went down with the Luther Mahoney, drug lord character. He took it upon himself when he was suspended from the force to use his time to carry out sort of this personal vendetta against the Mahoney family and their people that worked. So he did these things where he arranged bad deals to happen and people within the organization to get angry at each other, and thus sort of the organization broke down. But he did it in a very personal way, where it wasn't as much about, oh, I've analyzed how the best strategy for taking this family down is. It was more like I called it an FI crusade, because it really seemed like he was so personally offended, and he was like, he took it upon himself that this is what I have to do as sort of this righteous cause. But even in that, I don't think he viewed it as, because I'm doing this, I'm morally superior to anyone who isn't. He just viewed it as, this is sort of like what I have to do, what I feel like I have to do in order to right these wrongs. So, and you could definitely call him unhealthy during that period, because he definitely was very kind of almost neurotically consumed by this one thing he was driving him. But I still don't think he was viewing it from a morally superior perspective. It was just the strongest example of something where he felt like he had a cause that was more important than anything else that was going on, including neglecting his own physical or mental health.
Yeah, I think there's a distinction here to be made between sort of morality and ethics. And I think Kersey was right to say that guardians are preoccupied with morality. And morality is more of the conventions of what is moral in your specific culture. And so this one here about a religion, that's more, that I would say is, if I'm going to tag that with a function, I would say that's FE. That is your conventional values, your sort of empirical values of your sort of culture. But I think both types can do it. I think FE types could get prideful in their values, and also FI types could get prideful in their values. I think it's an independent factor.
I would say that I'm not going to say that no SPs could do that from I'm better because I don't do these things, but I would think that that's in a strong minority. I would think SPs are the least likely types to do that, because because SPs, what I've said to people, because they would ask me what's an example of an SP version of evangelical Christianity, for instance, and I think of stuff like the guy that started a traveling show that was about skateboarding and music and stuff like that, but it was also had Christian preachers at it. That's the kind of SP version of that. It's how, it's not just a strategy to reach the kids. It's we relate to these things because we enjoy them also. And it's sort of we get hyped up about those particular things. But it's not presented as a morally superior, we're better than those other people that are doing these things. It's more a lot, when you hear that type of thing, it's usually a much more personal expression. The person says, I used to be into smoking, drinking, sex, whatever, and then I came to this realization that wasn't what life was about. Right. You have that kind of personal perspective of they're saying, I realized that wasn't right for me, not as much, because I'm now a Christian, I'm better than those people who do those things.
Also, I would say, Shalena, you can get ESTP politicians. Oh, Jeff's frozen. Have I frozen? You can get ESTP politicians that can appeal to that and take advantage of that. So, for example, they can play to a base and exploit those feelings in people. And from the outside, it might look like that the artisan has those values, but they're just exploiting it, playing to the base, playing to the playing to the prejudices of the audience. So you could get that from ESTP politicians, maybe. If you post something, Shalina, I just want to know if I've frozen. Right, so Jeff should be back at some point. Are you there, Shalina? Post a comment. I'll just. Yeah, I think you're right. It's difficult to. I know what you're saying. It's. And I think Vanderhoek might have been thinking about his culture, because I think Vanderhoek was very FE valuer. I think Vanderhoek was pretty conventional in his morality, and he even said so, that he has conventional moral evaluations. And so the FE of his particular culture in the Netherlands, he would have been very agreeable with. And so I think any sort of deviancy from that, he would have it looks like he wasn't as knowledgeable about other cultures, so that he couldn't actually maybe say good FE versus bad FE. Yes, I like Vanderhoek as well. I mean, I am, and I can prove it in future. Vanderhoek, yes. Yes. He changed my whole world when it comes to. Here we go. Jeff is back.
Woo.
Right then. What was I?
Yeah, I couldn't tell whose end that was because you froze to me first, and then it was showing both of us black with spinning circles, but it was still doing the clock. So I'm like, I don't know. But anyway.
Right.
But I'm back now, so that's the important.
Right. So yeah. So I suppose the H-Lots homicide life on the streets could be used as an example of saying that of the Pembleton, where you've got SE before FI, where mainly it's like the opportunism, and it's like, but it's much more important for Lewis to like stick with his feelings.
And even on a external level, you still saw, like, you call Lewis gregarious, but he really was kind of laid back in a lot of ways. And Pembleton was much more of a demonstrative expression when he did express himself. So it was like people would sort of trigger things in him, and then he would kind of have these little tantrums about things. I mean, the very first episode when they're trying to find the car, and Felton keeps telling him, let's just go upstairs and get another one. And he's like, I am not going upstairs. You know, and that's not just for, he does those things where he's got these dramatic flourish things where it's like, for anybody in the vicinity who happens to hear this, here's my performance, like, view this. You know, it's not even as much necessarily about one person. Like, even when he blows up at Bayless about, like, you know, is that from your textbook, rookie? You know, he's talking to Bayless, but I feel that so much because I've been in that exact same situation where he knows there's other people around the squad room, and that was as much for them as it was for Bayless. Like, I think he's showing off for them. He's saying in front of the rookie, I'm showing all of you how I approach this. So he's not just talking to Bayless.
Also, he doesn't want to lose the game. He doesn't want to lose the point to Felton.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to lose it's like, I remember reading something about Porridge, about where the prisoner said, so this ex-prisoner wrote a book about how to get through prison, and he talked about getting little victories over the guards. And that made me think of win the moment. And Pembleton does not want to lose that moment to Felton by conceding the point. I think if it was somebody else, say, hey, why don't you go up and get another, he might have done it. But he didn't want to lose that point to Felton, did he? Didn't want to lose that little battle.
So that's another, to me, example of you seeing his artisan temperament. Is he's stubborn in the way where it's like, I'm going to win. There's not anything you're going to say that's going to change. You know, like, there's not
I have to win this moment.
Right. You. Because if any amount of things that Felton said to him broke him down finally, and he changed, then it would be like he gave in, I lost to Felton, and I'm not going to let it happen. So he had to ultimately, it only ended when somebody else interrupted them. So then it was like he didn't lose to Felton. This other thing happened. So then they both had an escape from their points that they were stuck
it's
on.
like from the outside, people would say, you can see how much Pemberton wants to win this moment, but it's like, this is out of proportion. Like, the bigger picture of this is that you could be there for the rest of the day until you find
right, but it doesn't matter. And there's a scene in like season 3 or 4 where they had the gas leak or whatever in the main office, so they had to use that temporary office, and Pemberton doesn't like the box in the new office, and like there's something hanging down at some point. He's like, and what is this thing? And he just throws it up against the wall, and then he has like this whole like tantrum about all that as he walks out. Again, some people observing that would be like, oh, he's just having a bad day, or he's really mad about this particular the Guardian interpretation, I think, would be, oh, the working conditions are not sufficient for him because they're not what he's used to. So it's this change in the environment. But I don't really think that was even it. He just used it as an excuse. It's like I was saying earlier, it's an opportunistic way for him to like, I feel like having a tantrum. Here's what I can use to do that.
Yeah.
And
to
so
make
he does.
An impact. To make an impact.
So I know that feeling very well, where there's times that I blew up in a situation where I wasn't even really that angry. It's just, it felt good. It was time. It was like I needed to do that, and someone provided me a reason. So the thing that I blew up about appeared to be the thing that was making me upset, but it really wasn't. It was just fulfilling a need, and that was the tool.
And this is how artisans can outwit other temperaments, because the other temperaments might be looking for a reason for that and trying to strategize based off that, and to like read what you might do, and so you can't predict them, and that gives you an advantage.
Right. That whole thing Kersey said about using whatever, like everything's on the table, in negotiations, and it's the same thing with anything else. It doesn't have to be a negotiation. It's just, here is the things around me, and it doesn't even have to be physical things, but obviously those are, the tangible thing you can see. But here's the situation, and what in that situation can I use to whatever advantage or whatever action that I'm trying to do now, whether it makes any sense to anybody else or not, because that part matters less.
Right. Because I remember you saying, Jeff, that you were really happy when somebody told you at work, I never know what you're going to say next, Jeff.
Yeah. And contrasting, the thing that makes me the most disappointed is when someone tells me I'm predictable, which happened, a couple weeks ago when I was in tennis, and there was someone that basically said that they were able to get an advantage over me, another artisan likely, because the person observed my movements, and said I was basically telegraphing where I was going based on my body movements.
Right.
And so,
I'll just say to the audience, that is an example of the tactical intellect that artisans are usually very good at. Like, it's like a lot of life so do you think a lot of artisans, Jeff, above the other temperaments, will view life as like a poker game, and sort of like when to bluff, when to fold, when to how to play your hand, a little bit like that?
Yeah, that'd probably be the STP version. The SFP version is that quote about all the world's a stage.
Right. I think you're right. Yeah,
it's all a performance.
Right. I think that's right. Yeah, more calculating, the STP version,
or a canvas. I don't know. ISFPs might say a canvas. The whole like throw your paint on them.
Ah, gotcha. Yeah.
So we all have a slightly different version of the same thing, but it's I mean, it still is about tactical movement. The other thing I'm trying to remember, because this is sort of reminding me of another thing I thought of last night when I was listening to the end of your video. about? Oh, the part of Brains and Careers, I think it's in Personology too, where he also talks about performers specifically as the coworker, or I forgot the other word he used for it, but the Barron's had a word for it too. Like, but anyway, it's basically like we need a certain amount of feedback. Oh, I know what it was. You were talking about the romance styles. Okay, so you and I have gone back and forth on those things before, where I think those are way too oversimplified to be like all SPs are this, and I think from my perspective that it's an area where that exact same thing plays in, because even though you can describe it as like a performer for an audience is sort of needs the audience response, and then they decide, like say a stand-up comedian is like, oh, well, this joke worked, this one didn't, and so then the next thing I say is based on, if this was funny, then I keep going in that direction, or I keep hitting that joke because it worked. It's the same thing in romantic situations. The difference, I think the initial move could sometimes be aggressive, but if the feedback is, no, I don't like this, then at that point, I'm going to be I'm going to back up or back off a bit and be a little bit more in the direction of tenderness rather than toughness, because I've seen the person respond in a negative way. Whereas there could be, and again, I'm not saying all of them, there could be some maybe ESTPs that they're going to take that as, oh, I got a negative reaction, I'm going to actually ramp up the aggression because this person is playing hard to get. And so this is somebody who really wants me to continue that. So that, because it may be the case in some people, but I think I don't have that attitude. I feel like I want people to enjoy themselves, including around me. So if they're attracted to me, I want it to be because that I make them laugh or happy, rather than that I really hammer home like an aggression kind of thing. That's what I thought of when I was listening to that, because I was like, that's an example of where the feedback is important. Like if you, and consequently, when I get no reaction, because I remember I told a story about, I went out with this one ISTJ girl who, it was like I told my jokes and she would be like stone-faced, and then she would start talking, she would go back to her script about like her career plans. And it was as if like, it was this, it happened like multiple times, or and then I would listen to her whole thing about the career plans. I'd make a joke about it, usually like a wordplay thing, like you talked about, in response to something she said, like take her super serious thing and like make light of it. And then again, it was like she would pause, like let me finish my joke, and then just be like, yeah, so anyway, it was like no reaction. So there's an example of something where it's like the feedback is telling me, well, I'm getting nowhere with this. It didn't make me want to be aggressive, but it made me kind of feel like we don't have any chemistry. So at that point, obviously there's two different options. There's like giving up on it, which eventually I did, but it didn't yet in that particular date. It was more like, so maybe I need to appeal to something else. So I tried to do the same thing, where I started to try to be like, well, here's the way I see what I'd like to do with my life. So I was like, well, maybe we can relate on that level. So again, it was a tactic change based on the feedback. So it would be the same thing if somebody thought I would, because I thought about the aggression thing and I was like, well, that doesn't necessarily mean physical aggression. You can verbally kind of play with people in a way where you're kind of playing up a thing to, sort of imply something about yourself in an egotistical kind of way, but not in like a offensive way, but just sort of like, oh yeah, I know you'd like to do this, or you like me this way. And you're doing it in just sort of a joking manner, but still sort of at the same time opportunistically throwing that out there for someone, if they do agree with it, someone to say, oh yeah, I don't want to get too personal, but I can think of a particular example from my past, I'll say, where I sort of did wear someone down over time with some of the things that she was willing to do that she wasn't at the beginning. I'll just put it that way. And it wasn't some sort of master plan again. It was just me sort of having those little openings and then using the feedback to be like, okay, well, we're not quite ready for this yet. But then, you know, and I think probably a lot of people of different types do that in some manner, but it's just about the style, I think.
Yeah, I think some people can do that, but they're not focused on the person's reaction. You're focused on the person's reaction.
Right. Yeah. There's some people that are much more like they're going to follow.
You know where the line is. You know, because that's another thing I noticed about artisans. I remember when I was at school, there would be these kids that knew that they seemed to be brilliant at knowing just how far to push the teacher.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
so all of these aspects of SE, socionics does not capture it. It just has that bit, like, you know, the Force Sensorics stuff, like this, basically the kind of SE that ESTPs use. But it's almost like you and your son Morgan together. I think you could maybe have a panel where you invite people to come up and say, right, give me your best definition of extroverted sensing that fits us. Right, you're gone, and then the next one, and then try and find out who's got sort of like the best definition. Because the way I see it is, I want to try to define SE that fits the artisan temperament. And I think Dario Nardi has done the same thing. It's like these little bits that you mentioned, Jeff, about obviously harmonizing, adapting to circumstances is a big part of SE. Seeing what the lay of the land is and adapting to that. Whereas socionics sees SE as it's too assertive. It's just this portion of it. Whereas there is an adaptable part of SE. It's knowing when to push, when to hold back.
Yeah, and I just guessed before that maybe that was more of a cultural thing, you know, socionics coming out of Russia, you know, that just maybe that was the image that those particular people had more in that culture. But that's just a guess. I don't know that for sure.
But I also, someone like Olga Tangerman is SF. Like, she's SF. She might be artisan, but like her definition of SE though was much more like the way we understand it. Like, she emphasized freedom a lot more. So it might just be the fact that, as you said about D.A. Drenth, you thought that his articles on artisans were just rubbish because you thought he never met them. A lot of it is like too many abstract types in typology, writing about concrete types.
Even some of the people, like, I fully accept that if someone writes a description or that intuitives think, oh, this describes me, okay, that's fine. That's great. But then that same person doesn't necessarily mean that they're qualified to write about the sensing types. And when you read the sensing type descriptions and go, this looks like somebody read a magazine and started just listing a bunch of stereotype characters or famous people, then no, I'm not going to accept that because this person is so brilliant in their intuition descriptions that somehow that me not getting their sensor description or me not thinking those are good means I just don't get it, and somehow I'm denying my things about myself. Like, that kind of stuff is complete garbage, and I don't accept it. I don't care what, you know, list of degrees someone has.
So I tried to get like the four sort of main areas of SE, sort of like the stuff about stimulation and attention. Attention as like the ability to focus. So for instance, in sport, you'll see, like as you said about Michael Jordan, like pretty much his ability to focus, I imagine. Everyone in sport is brilliant to like be in the zone and focus on what they're doing and win in the moment. And that need for stimulation that can become unhealthy when you've got somebody that's got, as Kersey said, it's a sensation-seeking personality, or we could say a stimulation-seeking personality. So there's that part of SE. There's this part of SE, this Force Sensorics part that gets exaggerated in socionics. And then there's the creative part that I think maybe Kersey was biased towards, the creative part of, because nearly all of the roles that he had, have you ever thought, did you think, Jeff, that did Kersey go a little bit too far in saying that all of the roles that artisans are predisposed to are creative roles? But then he did clarify by saying, but to me, art means any action where the next
Yeah, no, I
there's a
didn't
free
think that.
variable.
I think the biggest flaw I think in Kersey's type descriptions that I've always said is that he highlights so much of the standout versions of those people that it kind
Yes.
of makes somebody reading it who's just a regular person, for lack of a better term, feel a little bit like, well, I don't relate to this because it's just much more accomplished or fantastical in terms of like, I'm not a fighter pilot or a world explorer or a military general or, these kind of examples where you're like, well, I think a lot of people reading it that are sensing types are going to read it more literally about the actions as opposed to the preferences behind them. So they may get a little confused or at least feel like they don't relate to it because they think, oh, I haven't done all these things, so I guess I'm not one of these people. So I think that was his attempt to make it relatable actually makes it less relatable in some ways because he was trying to give examples that everybody knew by using famous people and people that had achieved these things, that people would understand the example.
Oh, yeah.
But by doing that, you make the average person kind of feel like, oh, you have to be, if I'm an entertainer, I have to be famous, otherwise I don't qualify. That's kind of the attitude that I got a bit from that. Yeah. And the funny thing is that Dave Kersey, the junior, he actually told me that had never occurred to him that someone would think that basically when I said that I felt like a failure compared to the artisans that were given, I felt like I'm not sure I said failure, but like basically I felt inferior to I wasn't a good enough artisan. He said that it had never occurred to him that somebody would read it and think that. And I'm like, I don't remember if he actually thanked me for telling him that, but I think he did say like it was new input for him that he didn't really had considered that.
Yeah, I mean, Dario Nardi he's come up with these type descriptions, and his appear to be more of the average person of that type.
Whereas I think maybe
Kersey INTJ and INTP across as a genius.
Yeah, maybe Kersey thought that it would appeal to the ego of artisans or something to feel, oh yeah, I'm a dashing fighter pilot guy. That they would somehow they'd think of that way. It's rather, but someone like me and plenty of other people who has some insecurities about those elements of accomplishment, of the virtuoso stuff and the audacity and things. It very much can go the other direction where you think, oh, I don't measure up to this standard.
I think what it might be is that I've noticed, because I a year or so ago, I went through all the Kersey profiles. I finished the temperaments. What I noticed is that towards the end of the profiles, in like the last third of each profile, in Please Understand Me Too, he talks about the type outside of the idealized version of it. And usually when it starts off, it's like the idealized version of the type. And then towards the end, so for instance, the ESFP profile, towards the end, he'll talk about, oh, they're good in sales and stuff like that. And so it gives an idea of, now he's giving examples of ESFPs that aren't the great actor or actress. So towards the back end of each profile, he sort of shows the less accomplished examples of somebody of that type.
Yeah, he kind of has little throwaway bits in there. Like
I wish it'd structure it differently.
Right. It's sort of like, well, it could be your teacher or your mailman or whatever. It's kind of thrown in there at the end, like sort of, it might be this other person. And so I feel like maybe in my communication about that stuff to other people, that's why I've kind of tried to go the opposite route and stress more of the average person in terms of how it just sort of looks in real life with people that are, I think I gave an example in a previous video of like, there's somewhere right now, there's, a teacher who, just got home from teaching kids all day and is just sitting on a couch watching TV, and that person is no less of an artisan because they're not, that they didn't get done with their day of teaching and go water skiing or mountain climbing or something. They didn't. That person was tired and needed to rest. It's not. There's this expectation like, oh, we've got to be constantly doing some sort of action type activity, as opposed to, sometimes you just kind of need to relax.
Oh yeah, so for example, retro gamer, like the Kersey ENTJ looks like a business genius. Now this one on screen, I'm gonna show Dario Nardi's description of INTP. So they posted these on LinkedIn. I just want to show how.
I feel like you're getting off topic, Ben.
Yeah, it's a little bit off topic, but okay. I'm
just telling you, this is the point in the video where if I was watching the video, I would be like,
okay. I'm gonna defer to Jeff. I'm just gonna say that go by the descriptions or look at them on LinkedIn. That Dario's they do seem like the average version of the types. And in fact, when I read the description of the creative INTP, I was like, can't it be a little bit more impressive? Because I was sort of like, because the example of it is like the guy that goes on the internet and distracts and doesn't get anything done because they're looking at different articles on Wikipedia. And I thought,
there's one line, speaking of the Please Understand Me 2 descriptions, where he actually does like include, I think the phrase was, he put crawling the World Wide Web. He listed that as an action, among the other things. So I was like, even that, and especially now, I think Kersey was just of a generation that he hadn't, the internet was not what it is now in terms of the just ubiquitous thing where everybody's connected on stuff. And so there's so many people now where it's like basically live their life online. Like that they spend more time doing that than they do actually in person connecting with people. So, and that's people of all types. That's not limited to any particular type. That's just like the society that we're in now.
So when I talked about the romance styles and I gave the example of wait a minute, there's a bit here from Piresh. Yeah, I'm just going to give a small example of this. So I can give examples of INTPs that can do TE. David Mark Kersey was laid off. He worked for an American defense company, and I think it was either that or DARPA in the 1980s. And then he went to work with, he might have been in the 1990s. He went to work for his dad, and he created the Kersey business for his dad. So there's an example of someone with INTP preferences who was able to create a business, and the Kersey business became very successful. You also have a lot of INTPs that would work, say, in IT or work in science. And I think their TE is pretty good. They're pretty good at measuring stuff and having empirical thinking. So INTPs can do TE as part of their job. Like I said, there's a lot of INTPs that work with computers and INTPs that work in science. They can do that kind of TE stuff, empirical stuff. What was the other part of it? About ESFJ. The ESFJ kind of TE is they are good at the logistical kind of TE. They can start a business that's about supply and use their people contacts. Right, I'm gonna get back on topic. So back to Jeff when he comes back, and I'll mention something about the romance style of artisans. Right, so people watching. So yeah, I try to get these sort of 4 aspects of SE that the various groups that I've sort of seen and sort of categorize them thus. Yeah, so the stimulation and attention part of SE is that it's not just sensing, it's the emotional reaction. Third TE. Well, in my system, it is slot 4 TE. But anyway, getting back to Jeff. So want to take advantage of Jeff being here and ask him about. So, Jeff, could you give us some examples of sort of the theme of it? Okay.
Well, first, I was going to say my response to that question is, what about SPs ignoring questions that don't have to do with us?
Okay. Sorry. I've got a question for you. So, Jeff, what are your thoughts on why you like impulsivity, what people have said to you about impulsivity, and that idea of, for you, impulsivity is a good thing?
What are you asking me about that?
Okay, so I'll put it, here's a silly question. Do you enjoy being impulsive?
Yes.
How does it make you feel when, or could you give us some examples of you being impulsive and how you felt when you did that?
Well, I mean, it's hard for me to just come up with something, because it's like, that's every opportunity in my life that I have. it always feels better to be impulsive than it does to the more something feels like an obligation or a scheduled thing, the less that I want to do it. So and the example I usually use in terms of to fully understand the difference is, there can be something that I enjoy doing very much, that if somebody schedules it 3 weeks from now, the closer we get to that 3 weeks being over, the less I'm looking forward to doing that activity. Whereas that's a direct contrast to, I'm sure, a lot of types of people, is exactly the opposite. They're getting more and more excited as they get close to this day and time that they're got this activity scheduled, that's something they enjoy. I have exactly the opposite feeling. And why is that? Because the more that it is in advance, the less it feels like a spontaneous, impulsive action that's fun. It feels like an obligation. It feels like this thing that I'm being expected to do, instead of something I just thought, hey, this would be fun. So it doesn't have to be something like work or something that feels like it's going to be a tedious thing. It can be something really fun. It could be like, there's a new movie coming out I want to see, or there's a concert, or there's some other thing that it's like looking forward to doing, or engaging with people, and that's going to be fun. But then the more that it becomes like a logistical thing of, oh, we've got to get to this place at this time, and we've got to make sure like all these other like obligational type things are met, like that stuff it sucks the fun out of it. Whereas what I'd like to do most of all is, here's what I feel like doing now.
Right.
Let's go do it. Like, the closer something is to that, the more I'm going to enjoy it.
So by having that thing, that it's almost like narrowing down your options, you're feeling less free because of this thing that you'd like to do, but it means because it's coming up, you feel less free because I have to do this thing. I want to do this thing, but it means I can't do these other things, anything that crops up.
Right. Yeah. Because if I'm committed to that, and then 2 minutes before it was time to leave for whatever that is, I suddenly thought, hey, it would be cool to do whatever, and and then I'm like, well, I can't do that because I'm already obligated to this other thing, despite the other thing being something I really want to do. It still makes me feel slightly let down that I couldn't do whatever that other thing that popped in my head was.
How do you think, because we talked about this a lot before, but I think this audience will be, because we usually talked about it in the context of the homicide reviews. How do you think maturity plays into the artisan temperament?
You mean as in terms of how the maturity like varies from other types?
Or is it a case of the artisan just changes their behavior a little bit, but they still have pretty much the same desires and preferences, or something else? How has it been for you? How has sort of like maturity affected your expression of your temperament, if not the temperament?
I mean, basically, I would say maturity for an artisan is realizing important things, such as there has to be structure in order to push against structure. So if your entire life is devoted to freeing yourself from all structure, and you actually are able to get into that type of environment where you have no structure anymore, you're actually going to end up feeling not nearly as good as you think you are, because you won't have that thing to push against.
Yeah, you won't get any victories.
So this happens with like famous rich people, where it's like if everyone surrounding them is yes men, where they can just do whatever they want, then they keep getting bored because there's nobody pushing back. There's nobody saying you can't do that, because artisans are inspired to do what people tell them they can't do. So if everyone around you is saying that you can do it and there's no problem with that, you can do whatever you want, then it becomes boring. So you have to have some structure. That's why when parents have asked me like for advice on, I've got an artisan child, like what kind of tips do you have on parenting and stuff? And I say, the first thing usually comes to mind is give them something it's okay to break, but don't necessarily tell them that.
I remember that thing you did with Morgan where you gave him something like to direct his attention on something. Like maybe something that he could do something naughty in a certain area, and you pretended not to know, or something.
Yeah,
was that?
There were some things like that, but you know,
he was very little at the time.
Right, and like I thought of, you know, not everybody obviously has the resources to have like a whole room that you can like throw things around in, break stuff, whatever. If you do have those resources, by all means use them. But if you don't have that, at least have there be sort of a small scale version of that, where there's something where they can physically manipulate objects in ways where they can be kind of more aggressive with things and stuff, and it's okay. It's not going to cause your whole house to fall down, or just try to find those opportunities where they have something that, and what the aspect that you referred to give them something they feel like they can kind of get away with something. You can feel like they're putting one over on you, even if you're aware of it, because they're going to be looking for those things anyway. And so if you allow something where you're still basically in control of it, but you allow them to have something where they can kind of sneak around a bit, because it's such a part of building self-esteem, is that ability of the skill of I was able to fool somebody with this thing, or I was able to, I remember when I was I was like a teenager, probably like 14 or so, and one of my cousins, who I think probably is an ESTP, but I don't know. I haven't spoken to her since then. It's been a really long time, so I really don't know. I'm very curious to the type of adult that she developed into. But at that age, she was probably 3 or 4 years younger than me, so somewhere around, like, I'm 14, maybe she's maybe 11. And she started telling me, she was just very like excited, not like loud about it, but excited in the sense that she just thought this was this cool thing she was going to tell me about the ways that she had figured out how to spy on her parents in various ways and other members of her family. And she just had this satisfaction and confidence in the way that she talked about how she had figured out these things that she could do in her house or at other people's houses. And that's an example. It's another thing what I'm talking about. It's just, there's this, you talked about pride earlier. There's sort of a pride in that, in being able to accomplish those things. It's not someone can look at that and say, oh, this is a sinister thing. You don't want kids to be deceitful or whatever. The thing is it's actually, we talked about healthy and unhealthy. It's healthy to do that in ways that really don't harm anyone, because the more that you try to restrict and prevent kids from being able to do that, as at least in Artisans, they're going to find outlets for that are maybe more destructive later on if they're not able to do it in ways that really aren't very damaging. And I feel like I can give examples from my own life in terms of, I had a pretty strict upbringing in a lot of ways, but one of the positives of that was that
Sorry, that's an assertive knock.
Yeah, it was. Hang on a second.
That was a big time knock. Right then, so folks, here, this tactical intellect of sort of like winning the moment, really wanting to win. So let's have a look at Alex's start of speech. Interpolation of play, joy, lust, fear, seeking, like and dislike, grief. The universal must be in all types at the conceptual in both human and mammal brain. No?
Anyway, I was going to say,
go on.
I appreciated things that some other kids my age didn't when I got the opportunity to do them, because I hadn't so much of the time. So things like, my parents wouldn't let me eat sugary cereal or peanut butter with sugar in it, or, things like that. So when I had the opportunity to have those things, it was like, there was a part of me that felt like I was getting away with something. I'm having this treat that I was never able to have. And taking pleasure in things that were, you could say from a long term they're destructive. I had too much sugar and get too fat and have medical problems and stuff, that there was damages, but it's still not the same as me like getting drunk, driving a car and killing somebody. There's a definite distinction there between the level of destructiveness of something. And I never had desires for some of those type of things. I remember actually Jonathan saying something like Prince saying he wanted to run Michael Jackson over in his car or something. I did in fact have a few of those type of fantasies, but I didn't actually do them.
Who did you want to run over, Jeff?
The woman who became my stepmother. Well, that's just one example. There were probably others, but that's one that I immediately think of, that I actually wrote that in a journal. So if anybody wanted to use that against me and talk about how I was violent, I had violent thoughts as a teenager, that would be where that would come from. But the funny thing is, when I wrote about it, I even said in the writing that it was like, I have thoughts of doing this, not like I really want to do that. It wasn't worded in a way like, here's what I'm going to do. It was more like, when I'm having thoughts about what I want to do, that's one of the things that occurs to me that I would want to do. So something to that effect. I don't remember exactly how I worded it, but anyway.
Yeah. So this
but I'll be right.
Okay. This continual thing of when a theme of, especially with STPs, of that's something there that Jeff, it's like this one-upmanship, trying to get something over on somebody else. Now, interestingly enough, though, ENTPs like to do that as well. A sort of a one-upmanship, but usually it's sort of intellectually with ENTPs, is their sort of one-upmanship. What I mean by that is, like, in terms of like winning an interaction with an argument, sort of winning a debate, getting the last word on something. So there is a little bit of overlap there, but that's from the EP thing and sort of weak. And so ENTPs can ENTPs can wish to win the moment intellectually. So, for example, find a hole in someone's argument, and so as a way to show off. Kersey wrote about the ENTP as having inappropriate use of debate tactics, even with their friends. It depends what area the INTP is in. Like with the pragmatism, like if you've got an INTP that works in computing, then they're going to learn a lot of pragmatism from there and sort of think about it. It sort of the demands of the job will affect the INTP. So I'm going to say something about so hopefully what should appear on this channel by the end of the year, some videos related to Wilma's housemates, and I'm going to have a meeting. It's not today, it's tomorrow at 8 o'clock my time with the director and the director of photography. And in that instance, there's an example of an INTP trying to use TE in that getting a sitcom done where no one's getting paid. Right. So that's a TE task for me. How to get a sitcom done without paying the cast and crew. TE challenge. But in that, though, in putting that together, is that just TE, or is a lot of that is FE and finding compensation for people? Yeah, commonly known for bad faith arguments. Yeah. Could it be that in personality, the type functions are behaviors that nuance the drives in the primitive brain rather than reflective control of impulses that react? That could be a video in itself. Alex always talks like this, Jeff. Like Alex, he has this retro gamer 71. It's like you do a whole video on that.
Talks like what? Could it be?
Yeah.
And in personality, the type functions are behaviors that nuance the drives in the primitive brain rather than reflective control of impulses that we attribute to maturity.
Yeah, that's my answer as well.
Behaviors that nuance the drives rather than reflective control of impulses.
Okay,
I'm not seeing what the distinction is there. Like, that sounds like two different ways of saying the same thing.
But actually, this is an interesting... We can sort of change this question to something else in that...
Let's change it to what kind of cheeseburgers do you like?
No, in that...
I can answer that one better.
Yeah, but this is something that comes up in Kersey in that... like, people with a certain temperament have a predisposition towards a certain action. But does then that taking that action change the individual? So, for example, Jeff, if you became a traveling stand-up comedian and you became very good at that,
sounds good so far.
Yeah, that would maybe feed back, and that would obviously help you feel much better about yourself, and you'd feel like a great sort of self-esteem boost from that. So I think there can be a feedback from behaviors on the person. I don't know about functions, but on the person, because that's what you get in CBT. Because the CBT model is that the way you think, the way they feel, and the actions that you take and the consequences all affect each other.
Oh, yeah, you had asked me about maturity before. So I think Artisan maturity is like basically accepting reality in certain circumstances. It's just saying, like, here are things that I've realized are true about the world and people. Not I'm going to change myself because of that, but how am I going to adapt my methods and stuff? So you said something about, I can't remember what your exact words were, but you said something do you change the basic values or so? I'm sorry, I forgot how you worded it, but none of that changes in the sense that I don't think there are some people that act like with functions or whatever that people like get closer to being this all function being, or they come closer to being other temperaments. I don't really think that's the case. I think it's more just like you become more confident in your ability to use what's natural to you. Now, you can do some things that are less natural with enough practice and experience. And so that's a different kind of maturity, I guess. But that's more just about figuring out how to adapt to environments that are not as natural. But I think even existing in terms of reconciling, I guess, is what it is. Because I've said before, like if you just said to me, if you're going to live your life entirely on your preferences, like what would your life be like? And I've said before, it would be, I'd wake up whatever I felt, whatever time I woke up, wouldn't set an alarm. I would wake up, and whatever I felt like doing once I got to the point I was able to do anything, I would do it. And ideally, I'd have the ability to, the resources or the ability, so if I was like, hey, I feel like flying to Disney World, then I would have the ability to do that. But even if it wasn't something necessarily that required some kind of trip, still it would be whatever I felt like doing, then I could do it. So not constrained by any of the sort of logistical things like, oh, do I have the money for it? Do I have the time? Because I don't have the time because I have to go to my job. Because if I don't go to my job, I don't get the paycheck. And I don't have the money to pay the rent. If I don't pay the rent, I don't have a place to sleep. All those other things. That maturity is just sort of realizing those things exist and how to deal with them and how to adapt your life to still being able to enjoy your life and take those opportunities that you have despite not having that ideal life all the time. So it doesn't mean that you give up on the idea that maybe at some point it's possible to achieve that. It just means that you accept the reality that it's not currently there, and you're not just sitting all around whining about how you can't do the things you want to do, or even worse, putting that on other people, like expecting other people to bail you out of situations or take care of you all the time because you're like, well, I don't want to have to work and I don't have to do this, so I'll just continue to take advantage of whoever will give me things. I've told people before who kind of had rants about like particular Artisan family members that were giving them problems because they kept repeating the same things, but they keep on giving examples of where that person has been basically allowed to do those things because someone keeps reinforcing or enabling them. So I say an artisan will continue to gloriously fall into the safety net you provide for them. So if you keep on giving them that net, they're going to keep using it. There's not going to be a number of times where they suddenly go, you know what, I think this time I'll suddenly get my act together. The net has to be pulled away at least once. There has to be some instance where they go, oh, I have to adapt and deal with this myself. No one's going to bail me out of it. So that's why in America, our government is never fixed, because we keep on giving them that safety net, and they don't have to ever answer to the people because they keep getting reelected anyway.
So I think there's also the thing that artisans are pragmatic. There is that part of the artisan that is pragmatic.
Yes, and I had some conflict with some people in text discussions this week because I was expressing my pragmatism, and it conflicted with some people's sort of ideals for what they would prefer things to be. So, I deal with that kind of thing all the time, where it does not mean I don't have ideals or values. It just means that within the context of that, again, this goes back to that thing where we had the video where we talked with, was it Julia maybe? Where we were talking about the cooperator versus
I think Dr.
And I was talking about how it's so much about first instinct versus what you consider after that. It does not mean that you don't consider all of that. It's just, what is the first thing that is that, and for me, it's like, we can't get to the point where we're, using the ideal values or whatever, if we don't in fact lay the groundwork pragmatically in a given environment in order to allow it to exist. So you can have all the pie in the sky ideas you have about, here's how I want everybody to believe or act. But if you don't accept the reality of, here's how people are, here's how human nature is, and working within that context, how can we best sort of build the foundation and then get us to a point where we're closer to the ideal. Then you're never going to get there. It's just going to continue to be a fantasy.
Jeff, are you able to talk about the party that you're in? The political party? Or would you rather not?
Am I able to talk about it? Yes. I didn't know how much you wanted to, because I know you try not to alienate people with your stuff too, or YouTube.
Yeah, but I think it would. But I think it would be interesting to talk, because it's like, as you said, there are things that you believe in, and I think for you, it fits in with you on this channel, because it's like to say that.
Yeah, well, I'm
Jeff really believes in freedom. There you go.
Right here
wait one moment, Jeff. I'm just going to press the button. Can you do that again, and then people can see?
I'm representing for a particular group as we speak with my T-shirt.
Yeah.
But
so yeah, if you talk about your like political beliefs, freedom, because I think you're a little bit extra for an artisan in that. Like extra emphasis on freedom, and that is a big part of your politics as well. Or maybe there are other artisans who it's just that they've not expressed their value.
Well, yeah, I mean, not every artisan is going to say freedom is my number one thing, although a lot of them probably would. If you, and that's why, when I referenced that video with Julia. Because when I asked her, what do you live for? She basically said freedom. So to me, anyone who says that, that's the first indicator of an artisan mindset, is if that's the most important thing to you. But obviously there are people who would say that aren't necessarily artisans in terms of politics. Like if you said what you're, in politics, like what's the most important value? I don't think it's a majority of people that would say that, even in America. But a lot of people who are not, like there's plenty of guardians who might say, oh yeah, freedom, because they see freedom as this part of the tradition, and it's like, well, we have to uphold freedom. And that's not limited to even people of libertarian politics, and people that are very authoritarian will say they want to uphold freedom, whether you like it or not. The cops are going to beat the freedom into you if you don't accept it. I mean, that's, people will use that word for and then defy it with their actions in every capacity. So it in and of itself, it's just as much a buzzword as anything else. But I try to uphold what I believe it is, obviously, which is right out of the Kersey books in terms of the next action being a free variable. I believe in that for everybody. I believe that everybody should get to choose what they do with their life. So my entire philosophy / point of view, worldview, whatever you want to call it, is based on everyone being free to make their own decisions. So the farther away that anything is from that, then to me, the farther away it is from the ideal and how things should be according to my model. And the thing about that is that people would say, oh, well, if you're desiring that for other people, then that's just as much you wanting to, impose your values on other people as anyone else. And I would say, well, the difference is that within the context of individual freedom, you can, it's the point of view where it involves the most variety in terms of what can be achieved. So you can have a whole lot of different ideas of how you want society to be that can exist within a model of everyone has the freedom to do it. So a smaller community can be more authoritarian in structure because those people all agreed they wanted it to be that way. But you don't have the coercion where you try to have millions of people behave a certain way because they did not all agree to that. It's hard to get 1 million people to agree on everything, much less 300 million or more than that. So you can, in a smaller community, my county Libertarian Party, which is very small, when we have meetings, it's usually around barely double-digit number of people that show up at the meeting. And among even a small group like that, you have plenty of disagreement. Not everybody agrees on everything, but there are certain fundamental things that everyone accepts in order to be part of the group. And so you have already an understanding about those basic values. And then within that, you can kind of hash things out. You can vote on things. You can say, okay. And even if the minority on a particular vote may be like, well, this didn't go how I wanted it to, it's not to the point where it's like, oh, well, I'm going to leave because now everything's terrible because of this one thing. And that's a group of, 10 people. Whereas you try to do that for 300 million, and you're never going to have anything that comes close to a consensus. You can only have just enough of a majority to push something through. And the pushing something through is imposing it on everyone else. And a lot of even the simple majority weren't even in favor of it. You just had the people that had the power to push it through. People put those people in power in order to accomplish that. It wasn't something where they put that to a vote and a majority of people, it wasn't a democratic thing where, they polled everybody and 51% of people wanted to do whatever it was. No, it was people were elected and then happened to get a slight majority in order to enact their will on everyone else. So it's a completely different, it's a system that cannot work. Like I'm listening to the audiobook of Liberalism by Ludwig von Mises. And he basically says that socialism and all sort of government versions of socialism cannot actually ever work. Like he comes out and says it's self-defeating. Like basically the things that it even has as its ideals, when you just allow them without any opposition and say, okay, if you had nobody challenging this whatsoever, and you could actually enact your perfect system, it still wouldn't work for the following reasons. And he obviously gets into why that is, but it's like basically no one claims, I guess I wouldn't say no one, but very few people claim that some sort of perfect capitalist system, everyone's going to be equal in income. It just, no one claims that can happen.
No, the best reply is to say it's that the point is that I mean, it's like the difference between, it's like if everyone is just better off. I remember Margaret Thatcher put it brilliantly when she did it like this. She said that the people on the left would prefer that the rich were here and the poor were there, rather than the rich there and the poor there. Just as long as the gap was smaller, they didn't mind if everybody else was lower down.
Because
the gap is irrelevant.
Because if you're looking at people as statistics, that's where that stuff matters. Like you see these graphs and stuff people will post and be like, oh, this percentage of people have this percentage of the wealth and this other percent. None of that matters at all. It has literally no effect on anything. Like the fact that there's some trillionaire on an island somewhere, if that person exists doing whatever they're doing, has no effect on me. So you can make a graph that shows this percentage of people have whatever wealth, including that guy.
In fact,
and I'm the other part of the pie.
And in fact, that would actually benefit you if that person held onto their money and invested it, because it would lead to more production and more goods and more jobs.
But even without even considering that part of it, just the fact that someone can exist who is measured by this, that has no effect on my daily life whatsoever, demonstrates the folly of those. Like they all just completely collapse because they can be disproven by one person.
I'd like to, this comment here from this person. I don't think the founders of the United States, they believed in courts and high. I mean, not all of these make you socialist. For example, Social Security is a socialist policy, but police department, that doesn't make you a socialist just because you believe in police.
Right, because any group that is voluntary,
Yeah.
Is by definition
is not socialism.
A voluntary group. It's not coercion. Someone is a part of it voluntarily. And I realize that only the X factor when in call on that is always children, because you say, well, if children don't have the same rights as adults, then you can't say, well, it's voluntary for them, because kids don't choose like who their parents are. And even some of that has changed in some places, because you have abilities of children to separate under certain conditions. But even that, it's usually the government that's deciding those things. So that's the difficult one is dealing with children. But when you're talking about adults, voluntary agreements that someone gets into and saying, these are the things I want to pay for. I want to, I'm invested in this activity, therefore I want to do it. It is by definition a completely different action than coercive tactics.
Oh yes, and I'll just
based
say
upon you.
And that is different.
You have no control over, and that if you disobey, then you have a punitive thing such as fines or jail.
Yeah, I'll just say for the audience, and that is different from, we're not in favor of fraud. We still want laws against fraud. Libertarians are not in favor of fraud, and that those people can be sued if they're committing fraud.
Oh yeah,
that's Ponzi schemes and
that's the thing is, in a lot of ways, I actually think there's not. This will sound hilarious to people that hear all these things about, there's all these frivolous lawsuits. I actually think there's probably not enough lawsuits by private entities, because the courts are so packed up with frivolous cases that shouldn't even be cases, because they're based on something where there's no victim of anything. No one was actually wronged, so there's no recompense to be had. There would be room in a court system to settle things if they needed to be settled by lawsuits, if you got rid of all of the cases based on nothing, like drug possession, for instance, which is a complete waste of time for every single person that has to deal with that, from police officers, lawyers, courts.
Oh yeah, and what people say, when people say to you, oh, you want my child on drugs, the counterpoint is, I don't want your child in jail learning to become a criminal because your child is on drugs.
Right. I mean, there's always going to be people that are going to use drugs. What you eliminate is that as a way, like the gang culture is so much motivated by a way to belong to a group, which is the more Guardian view, or to make money, which is the more, with Guardians and Artisans and everybody else. Like it's, so you eliminate the things that drive that the most if you get rid of the criminal aspect of it. So, it does not claim, like I was saying, that there's some sort of perfection that is caused by this. That's the myth that somehow there's some sort of way that you can create some sort of perfect human cooperation. You're never going to have that. You're always going to have people who will try to take advantage of whatever system you have in place. But the more freedom that you have in terms of people having the ability to make their own decisions, the more that you can deal with the people that break the rules that do exist, that actually harm people. Like you have the opportunity to do that. The more local something is, and the more freed up those systems are to deal with actual crimes that hurt people, you have that ability under a system with more freedom. Whereas the more coercion and authoritarianism you have, you don't even get to that point, because you're just so clogged up with all of the things where people tried to somehow change behavior based on punishment.
Yeah, but here's the thing, though, is that libertarians are consistent. Democrats are inconsistent about, like, they want freedom to do things that they want to do, but also want to ban other people from doing things that they want to do. It
used to be that the libertarian pitch would say, well, Democrats are in favor of personal freedom, but not economic freedom, and Republicans are in favor of economic freedom, but not personal freedom. Neither one of those is the case anymore. Neither party is in favor of personal or economic freedom, and there's so many examples of both.
Also, both parties have become, because I listen to a lot to Robert Barnes, who talks about the majority of Americans are anti-war. Where has the anti-war left gone? There's a lot of wars been started by Democrats over the last 20 years.
Yeah, I mean that's along the same lines in terms of interventionist foreign policy. Again, has been supported for a long time by both Democrats and Republicans. But anyway,
anyhow, we're getting off track. But this is
I said that when I posted the link to this in Discord that we probably wouldn't talk much about politics, and then the funny thing is that I actually ended up being the one that brought it up originally.
The reason I brought this up is that artisan temperament doesn't mean that you don't have any values, you don't have any principles. Jeff here has a lot of principles, but I would say a lot of them are congruent with his temperament. So obviously valuing freedom is a massive part of Jeff's politics and his temperament.
See, what I'd really like to do, but I don't know if I have permission in either direction, is that I have a meeting of this group that's already started that I want to go to, but it's just a Discord, audio meeting. What I really wish, again, this goes back to that thing where we're like, what would you want to do now? I'd like to go into that meeting and continue this discussion and have those people involved in it. But I realize that these two environments are not necessarily like they may not necessarily want to be recorded. And you might not necessarily want to, since, now you're not technically a member of that group, the whole thing is just sort of logistically. Ideally, that's what I would do, though, because that's what seems like a cool thing to do. So there's an example of what we talked about earlier in the video. But.
Yeah, I've done that a little bit before, where it's like someone was in the comments and then they invited that person into the event, and sometimes it worked out and sometimes it didn't. Yeah, I put some of these quotes. I don't know what I was thinking here when I sort of came up with quotes from you that weren't quotes from you. I don't know why I put that in. Like, I will not be scheduled. It's a hypothetical quote from an artisan. I will not be scheduled. Yeah,
you're qualified to be a journalist now, Ben, because you come up with hypothetical quotes like they do.
Yeah, but I think Dr. K did say, "Win the moment." I think at one point you might have said, "Whatever we do the hell out of it." I
did say that, yes.
And you still stick to that.
Yes, and I think I was the one who came up with "win the moment" too, even though that was my paraphrasing of what Kersey said,
right?
Because that's what I realized was occurring. I realized that, and actually, the thing that led me to that line, that was how I sort of phrased why it came from the book 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, because at least a couple of those habits are things that artisans are never going to do, or at least are never going to believe in, because they basically are like contradicting our basic way of being. And one of them was basically to stop seeing every situation as being win-lose. Like, there doesn't have to be a winner or a loser. You can have everybody's a winner in whatever situation. And that is contrary to the nature of artisans, because we want there to be a way to be the sole winner in every situation. And it's not because we want to humiliate someone or be like, this person's a loser. Or again, it's not moral superiority, as we discussed earlier. It's just the feeling that life is this series of moments, this series of tests, challenges. And the thing to do is win that particular thing.
So it's like,
and if you lose, then it's the positive is you gain. Okay, why did I lose? Right. What can I do better next time to win the next time? So it's like a series of trial and error.
Right.
Where the error is losing that moment. And when you won the moment, it doesn't mean like you've succeeded in life for good and everything's perfect. It just means you've gotten more information, more tactical stuff, more thing like, here's a way that I won. So the next time I'm trying to win, I have a basis where I know how I won before.
So that person in the moment, that it's like, in the moment, I'm just trying to win, and you're the opponent. Even if you like the person,
yes.
opponent in this moment you're the opponent.
Yeah, it's like there were people that are confused when they'll watch a sporting event and see, like, say a basketball game where during the game, opposing players will start jawing with each other and actually like even start physically fighting, have to be like pulled away from each other, like they're getting up in each other's face, like, they really can't stand each other in the course of the game. Game ends and they're like shaking hands and hugging each other. Yep. And some people are confused by that. They're like, these guys were like up in each other's faces. How can they then be shaking hands? Because the game is over. Somebody won, somebody lost. You're no longer needing to be in that moment of you're facing that challenge because it's over until the next one. So then you didn't actually hate that person. They were your enemy within that context. So that's the thing that it's not really a personal thing. It's just, this is the opponent in this moment.
Yeah, I've heard that in like watching a lot of sport over the decades, and it's like something I've had to learn because it's not something that would come naturally to me. And it's like, so you hear these things like the person that we call it white line fever. When they're on the field, they can be really aggressive, and when they're not playing the sport, they can be like a different person. It's just that competitive environment. And also someone like Tyson Fury, the boxer, like trash talking somebody, but he thinks that he expects somebody to shake his hand afterwards.
Wow.
But it's like, if they've said, what about for you, Jeff, if you were involved in something and someone was trash talking you, would you shake their hand afterwards, or would there be a point where someone might go so far that you wouldn't shake their hand afterwards?
It would have to be pretty bad for me to not, like it, and it also matters what point in the competition it happened. If it was right near the end, then it might be a little too fresh. Yeah. But because I say that it's over when it's over, but the whistle blows, the horn goes off, whatever. If something just occurred, it can still physically take a little bit of time to kind of cool off from it. But yeah, someone would have had to have really crossed a line, and I can't really completely envision what that would be. But I'm sure there's something somebody could say that, I did think, I'm not going to shake that guy's hand or whatever. Yeah. But I can't immediately come up with what that would be, but there's probably something. I've had some times where I was pretty furious at someone in competition where afterwards I still was like, hey, good game, whatever. It's like I didn't necessarily want to go have a burger with the person, but I'm like, I still gave them their congratulations for, the competition. So I didn't hold some like grudge where I was like, stewing about it or anything.
I think an example of an artisan going too far would be Tyson Fury's dad, John Fury. Like, he was there promoting a boxing match between his son and Logan Paul's brother, and he was talking about, oh, my son's gonna take your girlfriend and do her in front of you, and it's like, and Tyson Fury is like, I can't believe what his father is saying. And like and another example of John Fury going too far, he was in a fight with somebody and he took someone's eye out. And then he went into prison for that. And that's why he can't travel to the United States. So he had the bad kind of impulse in the moment. So, but,
yeah, and that's kind of a separate thing from
that viciousness
trash talking or even like a kind of a fight happening in the middle. And the funny thing is with those is sometimes you've had, baseball is especially famous for this.
Oh yeah, the cool.
As happens maybe in some other things where you have sort of a grudge being held, where the next time the teams play, somebody sort of gets revenge for, say somebody got hit with a pitch, and then 3 months later they'll do it, and you kind of say, well, doesn't that contradict sort of the Artisan? Well, they let things go. And the thing is, the entire rest of the time in those 3 months, they weren't thinking about that. But when it came time to play them again, it's like you just picked up where you left off. It was like, okay, well, here's what we're going to do to show them. And so it's not this, well, they were working on this grand strategy to get back at these people. It was just, oh, we played them again. They did this to us last time. Therefore, we're going to do this to them now. It's still a tactical response. It's just delayed. It's like time was suspended for that particular thing, and then it's picked up 3 months later.
I also think it's the culture of baseball. Like, you don't get that in, say, American football, where you get actively gridiron, where you actively get penalized. There's not as much of the penalty system, is there?
Right?
In
yeah.
baseball,
In baseball, you're either thrown out or you're not. Yeah. There's. I mean, there could be verbal warnings by an umpire that says, stop this, or I'm going to.
Do they ban players for games? Do they ever ban players for games? Do they ever say you've been thrown out and you can't play for the next 10 games or anything like that?
Yeah, suspensions, yeah, for sure.
Right.
And even those are obviously argued about as far as the fairness of them or whether they were for the right amount of time. I was reading about one that was funny. Speaking of Artisan's tactics and adapting to things, Lou Piniella was a longtime player and manager. He's probably better known as a manager than he was as a player by most people. But in the early 90s, he was the manager of the Cincinnati Reds, won the World Series with them, and then he became the Seattle Mariners manager for a while. And somewhere in there, he decided he was going to test the suspension rules because for pitchers, the deal was, they had this sort of unwritten rule that a starting pitcher gets suspended for 5 games. That's not actually 5 games like it would be for a position player because they don't play 5 every game. They only start the game like every 5 days. So the idea that, no, that should be 5 starts, not 5 games. So it's actually a much longer period of time. But Lou Piniella decided to challenge that because there wasn't a specific thing that categorized what constituted a game for the starting pitcher. So he tried putting in that starting pitcher who was suspended as a pinch hitter, as a pinch runner, as a defensive substitute. Like, he started trying to put them in the game, and then this counts as a game. Because when you appealed a suspension, then the idea was then you'd have like a hearing about it. But he's like, okay, you're telling me that they can't be a starting pitcher for this period of time, but I'm putting them in a different role. And so they actually ended up having to rewrite the rules because he did that. And there's a lot of instances of this occurring.
I bet you really like that. That appeals to your artisan instinct.
Because that's the kind of stuff I would totally do in that situation. Yeah. I would find the loopholes in anything.
Getting around the rules, finding loopholes.
There was an owner, Bill Veck, wrote a book called Veck as in Wreck. Actually, I think he may have written more than one book. But back in the day, he started trying things because there was not technically rules against them. And they had to start writing rules specifically because they had to stop him from doing these things. So a couple of the more famous ones were that he would have a wall, an extra temporary wall on wheels. They'd roll into the outfield when the opponents were batting and then remove when his team was batting. So the other team had a wall they had to hit it over, and you didn't because there was no technically a rule.
That's like from a comedy film about baseball.
Yeah.
That sounds like it.
The other thing he did was he hired a midget, signed them to play on his team so that they'd have such a small strike zone that they would walk every time at bat because the pitchers couldn't get it in their strike zone.
Very good. That's clever. So as for maturity, this might be interesting. So what about this idea of knowing your limits? Because is there part of the art? I imagine as part of the artisan temperament is the against the actual idea of having limits. But did you sort of experience that, Jeff? This sort of like of learning limits and operating within your limits. Is that a theme of maturity as well for you? Knowing your limits?
Yeah, and that kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about the about having to have the structure that you can push against. Is all of that is testing those, but in order to test them, they have to be there. So one of the sort of maturity things is you realize that you need that in order to be able to do that. So, there are definitely, I think I know a previous video that we did where I talked about this. It may have even been that same one I was referencing with Julie. I watched it recently again, so that's why I was thinking of that one.
Okay.
Because at the time I did that video, I was doing the same thing I'm doing now, which is I was fasting. I think that time I was fasting for longer than this time, but because I was trying for like a certain number of hours, like a 36-hour fast or something. And right now what I'm doing is not that. I'm just trying to do basically like calorie cycling, where this is a really low calorie day. So because of that, the longer I can go without consuming any calories, the better, because it makes it easier to have the total for the day be less calories. But that's an example of something where there's a certain amount of discipline required to do that, where I'm not just giving into the instinct of, if I am hungry, I'm going to eat something.
Right.
So there has to be something where like you're denying instincts in a way, but you're doing it for a purpose. So it's like, it's still a tactic, but it's like a delayed gratification tactic in a way for the advantages that can be gained from it. So I think that is an example of what you were saying, but
I think
let me know if it isn't, because I'm
I think it's more about the idea of limits in terms of what you can and can't do. Because I remember in the past you pushed back against the idea of somebody having potential.
Yeah.
And so, do you think part of maturity for you is learning the limits of what you can and can't do?
I thought I already said yes to that.
No. What I mean is like what you personally are capable of. Because when you're younger, like say when you're 12, you might think, "Oh, I can do this." Do you think that is part of maturity? It's like when you said about feeling that you weren't a good enough artisan. Are there in certain areas where you feel, "Oh, I'm not good enough in that area"?
Yes.
Whereas in the past, you thought you could be better in that area.
Oh, I mean,
knowing one's own limitations,
I mean, in terms of just realizing the limits of my physical body, I think that's definitely true. Like, obviously, as a kid, I still entertain fantasies of being like a professional athlete or something like that. And at some point, I obviously realized I wasn't ever going to be that. That, you know, even if I spent every moment that I wasn't having to work on a job or whatever it is I had to, like, even if I spent all that time practicing, I was never going to get to that level. And then, you know, I realized, well, maybe if at the age of 6, like some people are younger, I had started doing that and practicing constantly for that, then maybe I could have achieved that. But at some point that became where I passed the age at which you could start that kind of dedication to something and have any chance to reach that level. Like over the past decade, where I've been playing tennis a lot more, I have definitely improved my tennis skills, and getting my body in better shape using some of the tactics that I was talking about allowed me to have more energy and more stamina to spend more time on my practice in tennis, and allowed me to improve my skills. All those things work off of each other. But I guess you could say a part of that maturity, or whatever you want to call it, was realizing that no matter how much I did do that, I wasn't going to become some professional tennis player. Obviously, I don't have to do that in order to still enjoy playing tennis and enjoy being able to get better at it. And I also accept the areas where I probably never am going to get better at it, because there's certain mental blocks that I have that unless some weird thing happens where all of a sudden my brain changes, I'm never going to change that limitation. So it's only going to be whether my body figures out a way to somehow adapt to something, because brain-wise, it's probably not going to change.
Yeah, because there is that, maybe it ties in with the idea of artisans being audacious and trying things. So I suppose artisans are going to learn a lot from mistakes because they're going to be more happy to make mistakes. Yes, Jeff?
Retro gamer, I'm not sure what you mean by sense the effects of keto or goal because it's a belief about it. I don't understand that question. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think maybe the goal of losing weight because of fasting or something.
I mean, I'll just say again, I'll plug my own channel and say if you go to the SP Spaz and the specifically the playlist that I called Fit Friday, where I did the videos about my weight loss and all that, I talk a lot about like what my experiments and experience with all that is, if you want to know more information about that stuff. So yeah, I go into a lot of detail as to a lot of different trial and error I did on the dieting and fasting and all that kind of stuff, including talking about how I've got this coffee cup here, how I came to actually enjoy drinking coffee and using it as a tool, whereas I didn't used to. Most of my life up until about 4 or 5 years ago, I didn't like coffee. I still drank it sometimes, only usually as a tactic for the caffeine purposes, like to try to stay awake. I used it in those capacities, but I didn't enjoy it. But that changed, and I have a video all about even that. So I went into quite a bit of detail of all that. So if you actually are interested to know more about that, there's where to go.
Yeah, he did good videos on his channel about.
Yeah, well, that's the thing is, even in videos where for the people, you were talking before about before we went on the air about how some of the reviews and stuff. You didn't send it out to your subscribers because it wasn't like what the people were on your channel for. That's kind of the case for me too, in the sense that obviously my channel started as a typology channel, and then I kind of did some other videos that didn't necessarily specifically have to do with that. But the thing is, the way I view it is all of that still comes out in all of those other things. No matter what I'm talking about or whatever activities, you can still observe in me all of those elements being present, and I still observe them in other people. I still hear things, like the graphic that Ben's got up now. I'll hear things that put somebody into one of those categories, in the sense that I can tell what it is they're valuing, or what they're affecting their self-image, or what their orientations are. Those things come out in the way people talk about stuff and the way they do things. So it's like, even if I wanted to, and I sort of try, because one of the things I've said about Artisans is we kind of have these phases where there's particular interests or particular things that we're really focused on doing, and other stuff kind of goes by the wayside. And so there's interests I've had in the past that really I did almost completely just drop, where like I used to care about this, now I just don't. I'm not paying any attention to whatsoever. Typology, I could never completely do that, because just in my daily life and observing people, including myself, stuff just comes out. Like, you can't avoid it. Once you know it, it just doesn't go away. Like, it always is present, which, like I said, I sort of almost tried actively to avoid that for a while, because I was either bored or annoyed by it, to the point where like I got tired of, especially this type of not Ben, but the like breaking down of everything into like functions and stuff. I got really sick of that. Like, where I would watch a video and I, like 2 minutes in, I had to turn it off because somebody was just like, well, you see, my activating FE went to the second left spinning circle of my my retrograding 9-6 type wing, and I'm like, good, I can't stand this. I'm turning it off. And even when I was most like that, where I was the least interested in hearing anything like that, if I just lived a day doing whatever it is I was doing, whether going to work, I would still observe things that showed me type stuff. Like, it didn't ever completely go away. I couldn't. So, it's one of those things that's ever present in some ways.
Yeah. There was that So Jeff, what do you? I think we've covered it.
I was going to say if you've gotten to the point where you're tired of it, we can go ahead and wrap it up. So
I just wondered if there's anything you thought. So I think one of the main things I asked you about the video is there something that I've missed out about SE that you would like to say?
Well, I'm just happy I was able to think of a few things that you did in fact discuss in the video. Like I remember I wanted to hit the romance style thing, and once again say that not all SPs really are aggressive in their romance style. I think that varies a lot, which I think you did say at the time, but I just want to emphasize because I think at some point in the past maybe you were a little bit more defending those than than you are now. And I was
I think I was a little bit more towards aggressor, but then it sort of came to me and I was like, hang on a minute, Jeff's not like that. And then there's interaction style as well.
Yeah, because if you just listed those and didn't explain anything about, and you said like it just had the list, like I would think childlike is more like me than aggressive. That's my immediate thought is that sounds more like me because I'm just like that in general. And it's funny because somebody watching this video, if it's the first time they saw me, might not think that. They might be, oh, you don't seem childlike. You're saying all these like, adult type topics or whatever. It doesn't mean I can't talk about those things. But again, my default way of being is much more like just laid back and let things happen and enjoy stuff. And I enjoy a lot of childlike type stuff. I really don't spend that much of my time talking about behavioral concepts and stuff like that.
Well, what I would say, Fate, is that most people are concrete types, and so if you tell them about Kersey, you're going towards concrete stuff that they can understand and motivations. So yeah, Jeff, like this question here is like if you use Kersey, that's easier for those to understand, and I think it's the most accurate system.
The people that I've just brought it up out of the blue with, it's always been examples where they were talking about a particular person, and in my opinion, usually misunderstanding their motivation. Like there was a guy that I used to hang out at a particular place and watch sports, and he was there a lot of the time. Again, this goes back to the acquaintance, not friends, because I don't even remember his name, don't know anything about really where he lived or anything, because we only saw each other at that one place. And most of the time, we would just talk about the sport itself. So the talking was like in relation to the sport we were watching. And sometimes we were on the same side. It was another funny dynamic because if it was college sports, like he's a Texas A&M fan, I'm a Texas Tech fan, so we would be opposed to each other if they were playing. But if it was Texas Rangers baseball team, we were both rooting for them to win. So we were on the same side on those games and then opposed to each other on other ones. And one particular time we started talking about Brett Favre, longtime NFL quarterback who had retired when he, his original career, he had said, I'm retiring, whatever. And he had already changed teams. Like he'd been on the Packers for a long time, won the Super Bowl with them, was mainly known as the Packers quarterback. But then towards the end of his first stint, he either got traded or signed as a free agent with the Jets, I believe. So anyway, but then he decided to retire. But after a couple of years, he came back. And not only did he come back, but he came back and signed with one of the teams that was the biggest rivals of the Packers. He signed with the Vikings. So a lot of Packers fans, it was like, oh, he betrayed us because now he's a Viking, and they're the enemy. But this guy was not even like a Packers fan. So his point of view, the guy I'm talking about, that I talked to in the sports bar, he was upset about Favre coming back, and not because he was a Packers fan, but because he was saying that Favre was coming back because he was like worried about his legacy. He was trying to like restore his legacy. And so he was saying that he's basically saying he was so arrogant that he didn't want for like the way his career had ended to be his final thing. He wanted to come in and just convince people he's like the greatest quarterback of all time. And anyway, everything he was saying about it was to me, it was very much a guardian perception of why someone would do this. Whereas I looked at it and said, Brett Favre was watching football on television and watching other quarterbacks and saying to himself, I can still do that. I can still be better than that. I can still go in and I can I can still get it, propel a team to victory. I can still do this. So it was sometimes you have people that retire and they're just done. And they never even really think about it again almost. It's just like, it was just time to stop. And then you have the people that they have those kind of aborted comebacks or whatever, because they're just like, I want to still do it, but I can't physically do it. So mentally they can't end it, but physically their body can't keep up anymore.
Yeah.
So from the Artisan perspective, like, I feel like I'm an extreme of that. Obviously, as I said, I'm never going to be a professional athlete, but if I was, I would have been closer to like Ricky Henderson in terms of the only reason that he retired because he was almost 50 and was still playing baseball professionally. He had members of his family that told him, because the MLB has a rule about you have to be retired for 4 or 5 years before you can be inducted in the Hall of Fame. And they said, if you don't retire now, you're going to have family members that get too old. They won't be able to see your Hall of Fame speech. And that's what eventually convinced him to retire, because he's like, I want for my aunt, whoever, who's 80 years old, to be able to see me be inducted in the Hall of Fame. Therefore, okay, I'll go ahead and retire so that clock starts of the whatever. Yeah. But that's the only thing that convinced him. Like, otherwise he was like, I can still play baseball. People still pay me to play it. Why would I stop?
Has anyone ever come back after being in the Hall of Fame?
That's a good question. I don't think so, because even Michael Jordan. Well, no, okay. I think Michael Jordan did, because I think, well, not maybe not. I don't remember whether he was already inducted. I don't think he was. I don't think he was before his last comeback. I don't think that had happened yet. I could be wrong though, but I'm all the dates are. I'm forgetting the dates of things, but I don't think he actually had been inducted into the Hall of Fame before that last comeback. So I don't know. There was definitely people that tried. Jim Palmer tried it in baseball, and again, he was one of those aborted comebacks I talked about, where he tried. He went to spring training, and he just figured out he wasn't going to be able to get it done. Either like I think he had like one start and just felt so dead after it, and then he came back and then he just gave up too many runs and was like, okay, this is like I could keep doing this, but it's not fun for me to be at this level compared to what I was before. So yeah, I think there's some people that have tried, but I'm not sure anyone's actually like been successful in that.
I think in the olden days, you'd have people in sport, they would continue on, they would just go down into the lower leagues, but they would continue to do their sport. So it'd be like old footballers of old cricketers. They would just go down to a lower league and still keep on playing. Or the same with people with, say, stand-up comedians, that their career is sort of over the hill, and then they end up working in Butlins, and like the career is still going on. But these are people who are has-beens, but they still continue.
Well, and that's what I was saying, is that I would have been one of those people where, like, my body would have to physically break down to the point that I couldn't play anymore in order for me to stop playing. Like even the Hall of Fame argument that Ricky Henderson wouldn't have done. Like somebody saying, my mother would have liked to see me in the Hall of Fame, so you should retire. So this clock, I still wouldn't have done it. So it would have been, I had to physically not be able to do it anymore. And no one is willing to offer me a contract to play anymore.
So if it was something like acting or being a comic in a club, would you pretty much like go, you're going to have to drag me off here. I'm going to keep doing this until I die.
As long as it was still fun for me, then I would want to keep doing it. And that's what, one of my favorite talk show hosts, Mark Davis, he's talked about that. He's like 64 or something. And he's talked about, people that think of like 60 or 65 as a retirement age, and he's a radio talk show host. He's like, why would I retire? Like, this is what I love doing. Like I can't imagine like I'm going to be like sitting at home, all this stuff is happening. He talks about politics and current issues, and like all these things are going to be happening, and I can't get on the radio and talk about them. Like, I mean, why would I do that? Like, why do I need to retire? Like, he gets vacation time already, so it's like I still get the chance to take a break when I want to. So why would I retire? And so that's kind of my view of it too. Like, if my job was something that was what I most enjoyed doing, then why would I retire? You know, there'd be no reason to.
It's like J. Michael Straczynski. He was born in 1954, and so he's going to be what, about 66? So a little bit, about 68. And so he's going to be coming back doing Babylon 5, and he's 68. He's going to be 68. He's 68 this year. He's still doing that. If it's fun, you don't want to retire.
Right.
No.
Yeah, especially something that's not a super physically taxing job. You know, you can obviously, like, you know, things like writers and producers and stuff, you know, the actual physical stuff involved in their job is pretty limited. So as long as you still got the brain capacity and it's a fun thing for you to do, then yeah, why stop if somebody still gives you the job?
Oh yeah, I remember there was a woman that did a video. There's a good video on temperament on YouTube that's not by Jeff. It was something like the Want Institute, and there's a woman that it's a 15-minute video where she describes the temperaments, and she's pretty funny, and she gives an example of Brett Favre being Artisan temperament, and the Artisan not really caring that much if they lose the game because they have the ability to move on.
That was the thing. I remember. I don't even remember who it was, but there was some talking head in sports, whoever it was, who got furious with Brett Favre because he was coming off the field smiling and laughing after he had thrown an interception to lose the game. Like, basically, Favre was like coming off like, well, you know, I gave him my best and it got intercepted, and you know, but he was having so much fun that it didn't matter. Like, it wasn't that he was happy they lost the game, but he was so caught up in the moment. It was like, this was this thrill of, oh, I had to thread the needle. Does he catch the pass, or does the other guy catch the pass? And the other team caught it. And it's like, oh yeah, I lost it. But he walked off the field just kind of laughing like, man, that's just how it goes, you know?
I mean,
this sports guy got so mad at him. He was like, Brett Favre is just like, you know, he only cares about himself because he's coming off the field, you know, laughing when he just threw the interception that cost him the game. He doesn't care about his team. He doesn't, you know, just this rant about it. And I'm like, you do not understand, you know, you're putting all these things in his head that are not there. Like, he does care about his team. You can still appreciate the thrill of that moment, even if you're disappointed, and still have that attitude where you're just like, you're smiling and laughing because it was this amazing experience, even if it didn't turn out how you wanted it to. And he also realizes, speaking of maturity, that losing this game was not the end of the world. Like, he's not going to die.
Yes.
No one lost their life. You know, it's not like South American soccer where somebody's going to get hung because they lost the game.
Yeah, it's like, I remember when they said about it was a case with the baseball players and the cricketers when they came back after serving in World War II. They just had a different mentality about it, and it's not that important.
Yeah, and I know that's a
a
recurring thing where there's athletes that have gotten flack because they said, you know, it's only a game, or like Manny Ramirez was another one, a baseball player. He had a lot of people accused him of not caring enough. He was too laid back. Because he was one of those that was always honest about that, where he's like, you know, it's not that big a deal. It's sports, you know. It's like, yes, we're being paid to win, but the whole thing is entertainment. There's no cancer is not cured if we win the World Series. You know, there's not some kind of societal achievement. It's just a game. And some people would get very angry at people for having the attitude, especially because they make a ton of money. So they would have this, you know, this millionaire can just be like, I don't care about winning because I get my paycheck either way. And, you know, so they frame it into an attitude of immaturity when really it's almost the opposite. It's really a way that they just sort of accept the reality of what they're really doing for the money.
Yeah, they can't hold the idea in their mind that whilst the game is on, they can be 100% into it. But when it's over, it's over. It's not to be like thought about and regretted about so much.
Yeah, and the irony of with the Manny Ramirez thing is one of the times he said that was famous for that his team was down 3-1 in the series, and the press was basically kind of pushing him about that. And that was when he said, well, we're going to try our best to come back and win the series, but if we don't, who cares? Is basically what he said. And that's what they jumped on him for. And they end up coming back and winning the series. So obviously that attitude did not cause him to play worse. In fact, it was almost the opposite. Like his attitude was, hey, I'm going to give it everything I have. If we win, great. If we don't, life goes on, Yeah, and they did win. And it's that mentality that allows athletes to have the capacity to win. Because any moment that you are too focused on something outside of what do I need to do right now is a moment you're distracted from that.
Oh, yeah. Because
failure. That's the thing is having that attitude of if we win, great. If we lose, who cares? Allowed him to be more in the moment of what do I need to do to propel the team to victory, because he's not concerned with what's the reaction going to be if we lose.
So it's like those people that choke under pressure, they're probably thinking too much about, I can't lose, I can't mess this up. And choke.
They're too much wrapped up in what's the effect of the loss, instead of just what do I need to do right now to win this.
Whereas you frequently get the STPs that are the bigger the game, the more the pressure, the more focused they are, the more attention is on them, the better they play. They call it in England the big game players or the big match players.
Mm-hmm.
Like someone like Tom Brady, like when the pressure's on the most, he plays better in those crucial moments, those game-winning moments.
Yeah. Yeah, and Brady is even like he's established himself probably as the best quarterback of all time, and without like basically he took what Brett Favre did and expanded on even more, because he went to a different team and won the Super Bowl again with a different team. Like all the people that said, "Oh, he's washed up," like he's had multiple times where somebody said, "Well, that was great and all, but he's not going to do it again." This is, he can't do that. He can't keep doing that year after year, and he keeps proving people wrong.
And
so he's had so many moments where it's like, he's basically indestructible almost in terms of his ability to, like, whatever anyone would throw at him to say, here's why you're not the best, he's got a counterexample, like in so many different areas. So it's like, so he's not bothered by any of that. Like, so you can tell when he's in a press conference, it's like he's in complete control, because there's nothing anyone can say that's going to phase him and have him be like, "Oh, I haven't considered that. Maybe my whole life is wrong or something." I mean, he's not going to do that. He knows he's so confident in who he is and what he's accomplished that you can't like bring him down from that. He's not going to be knocked down by anything. So because of that, it's like, not to get back into politics, but the way like Trump was with press conferences is he had that attitude. Like people talked about how Reagan didn't want to face the press and the main reason was not because he wasn't confident in his positions or anything. It was because he just found it boring. Trump relished it in a way because it was his opportunity to be like, bring it. Yeah, I'll just keep going. As long as you want to keep going, just keep firing this crap at me. I'll keep throwing it back. And regardless of anyone's opinions of his positions about anything, you can look at him from an observation thing in terms of his tactics and say he put himself up in that position of like, I'm not going to be fazed by anything. I'm not going to go by your terms. I'm going to frame this in my terms. Regardless of what you do, you're not going to bust me, because I have already decided that I'm going to win this in whatever capacity that requires. So that's the thing, is somebody can see that and think, oh, this person, I completely disagree with their opinions or their methods or whatever you want to say, but I can still appreciate the fact that someone had the confidence to be like, I will be in control of this no matter what somebody does. And you can see that in the attitude of artisan types in all things you observe, but especially like in public situations, because that's the point. That's the situation where there are the people who do get the most nerves, like you said, where there's people that are like, oh, I get stage fright, or, you know, speaking in front of people, I freeze, or I can't remember what I was going to say, or things like that. Whereas I've said before, I have the opposite. I have off-stage fright. The rest of life is scarier to me than a performance. A performance is where I thrive. It's everything else where I have awkwardness and
so Jeff,
feel out of place.
When you're a performer, because Alexa Bliss is I think she's Artisan. She loves Disney as well. Like whenever she's a wrestler in the WWE, and so whenever they go to a place that's near a Disney park, she goes to the Disney park and they let her arrive late because she needs to indulge her love of Disney stuff. And it also helped her when she was younger, because she had weight problems in times of being like very, very thin, anorexic, and so it helped to get happier and to eat more when she was went to Disney. Why am I bringing up Alexa? Oh yes, so she said that she liked playing her character in the WWE because that she's shy when she's herself. Now, is that a case of you though, where? But with you, I get the impression that you still want. So when you're doing videos online or here, like you're being yourself and you're getting the attention on you. So the acting for you is not really being someone completely different. But what's sort of like the fun there for you? Just the attention part?
Well, yeah, I mean, because it goes back to the thing you said at the very beginning about opportunism. Like the opportunity to entertain people is the performance, is me, and it's where I'm the most comfortable. Yeah. And that's why I've gone, you know, we're 2 hours and 46 minutes into this. If I didn't feel like I was doing that, I wouldn't, like I said, when you started, like you put up let's talk about INTPs, go to the mall or whatever that was. I'm like, that's where I tune out because I can't do that anymore. I don't know the thing you're talking about. I have no way to riff off of it. So it gives me no stimulation, and I just immediately start to tune out and want to do something else. So that's the credit to you, Ben, is your ability to think of enough things that I will have something to say about, that I can continue to flow in whatever it is we're talking about. And that, I was saying to Morgan the other day, that came from probably over the several years and all the videos we've done together, that you've gotten to know me to the point where you kind of know what those things are and are able to adapt yourself to those things and kind of steer things in those directions where you know that you're going to get the best out of me. And I've done the same thing with, videos that I was hosting, even though it's been a while, where I've done interactions with other people where I've kind of tried to be like, okay, what is it that is what I can get the most out of this person? But a lot of them were people I didn't know very well, hadn't done much with. So those ones, when you see them, it takes a lot longer to get into that mode if we do it all, because I'm having to kind of feel them out and figure out what those things are. Or I just ended up doing all the talking myself. Some people would accuse me of like dominating those conversations, but sometimes I felt like I had to. Because the person just wasn't giving me anything. Like if I asked them questions, they would be like 10-word answers and then it was over, and I had to come up with something to say to keep the video going. So that's the only reason I would do stuff like that. But now I am going to have to go. So I appreciate your inviting me, and I think we covered quite a bit of things. And I don't, I didn't, like I said, I didn't get all the stuff you kind of sped through in the end of that video. So I can't completely answer your question about is there something you missed, but repeating the stuff you have about the freedom being more important than power, it is probably a good thing. Power, I almost think of more of it being an NT thing in a lot of ways, because it's sort of related to that quest for knowledge. Knowledge is power, as they say. So, and we can do a whole other video about that sometime. But that's when I think of Davros. I feel like he was an NT And power,
INTJ.
like power over the universe was like his ultimate goal. He thought that was like the ideal achievement. So, and the Daleks were his means.
Power comes through. Ours is the victory, neither. They have lost. They speak of democracy, freedom, fairness. Those are the creeds of cowards. Those who listen to 1,000 viewpoints and try to set aside them. Power comes through strength, and strength through achievement comes through strength, and strength through absolute power. So,
and through the Daleks, I will achieve that power. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So he spells out exactly what his ultimate goal is and how he's going to get there. So I don't really think that's an Artisan thing, an extroverted sensing thing as much. You can be aware of power, but it's not the ultimate goal. So anyway, that's what I feel like. I feel like you have that exactly right through what influence of mine and other people that you've gotten it.
Yeah,
is that freedom is the ultimate achievement of extroverted sensing, because it's being able to, whatever is thrown at you in life, react to it in whatever way you want to.
What it might be, though, is like an extension of, say, for ESFP, to win the moment, and in the moment, best an individual and maybe show dominance.
Yeah. If you want to describe that as power, then yeah, that a certain kind of power, I guess that could be.
Not sort of this grand strategic plan.
Right. And it's not really as much about power over other people as it is power over one's own, freedom. I mean, I can do what I want to do is more important than I can make somebody else do something. That might be.
Yes.
That might be the end result of something, but that's not really the goal or what the most important.
When I think of it is like ESTP, like they don't want to be controlling other people's lives, because that means they've got to J other people's lives, and they don't want to do the J thing. They want to do the P thing.
We don't really want to be responsible. So, so that includes other people can be means to an end, but it's not about that. It's not, I've got this army of 100 people that do what I say. That in itself it doesn't accomplish anything. So anyway.
Yeah, but that's more of an anyway. So folks, that we'll just leave that, or maybe we could have Jonathan respond in future about, yes, some ESTPs can be Enneagram 8 like Trump, but I do think the way they operate power or use power is different from, say, ENTJ and ESTJ, where it really is more about controlling other people. The ENTJ.
Thanks for inviting me. Thanks for everybody who watched and future watchers. And if you have any more questions for me, don't hesitate to fire them at me in the many ways that I can be reached. And if you can't figure those out, ask Ben and he'll know.
Okay. And I'll press in end broadcast.
All right. Bye.